Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had a dragon made part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story, TriggeredIida from WhatIf. So let's start the video. Prologue - third person POV. In a different realm, in a different sky. Something was flying fast through the air, challenging a god by themselves. The creature's mouth opened and started to glow as it flew closer, dodging the god's lightning bolts as well. A sword came out of nowhere, and the creature was impaled by it. It roared and fell out of the sky, and with the remnants of its magic power, it opened a portal to Earth. Izuku's POV. You should already know what the beginning of 𝗵𝗃𝗃 is. The mountaintop, the same mountain where I had met her. Staring up into the sky, I saw the same god that had taken out the dragon of chaos. I was left bloodied, battered, and broken, a mortal standing up to a god. An ant in the eye of a human, but I wasn't ready to back down, not now, not until I fall. Freeze frame, record scratch. Now you're probably wondering how I got here. For that to happen, we need to go back a few years. 3 years ago. Today was the most appealing day. The sky was dark and it was raining. My favorite kind of weather, 'cause whenever it rains, I go to visit my favorite place that my mom always brought me to. 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, which was less of a mountain and more of a jagged hill, which I guess is a mountain. Despite me being quirkless, I always trained both my body and my mind at that mountain. Anyways, after waiting until the sun went down in my apartment by myself, I headed out with a hoodie and a pair of shorts on. Right when I left my house, I had seen something fly in the general direction that I was heading. Ding, what is that? I asked aloud as I was marveled by whatever that was. It's rare to see something that big fly in the sky, I said as I jogged towards the mountain. Usually it would take me about an hour to get to the mountain's beginning path, but I wanted to take a quicker route there. Without having had a break since I started, I stopped relatively near a warning sign for bears. The trail should be around here somewhere, I said as I disregarded the sign. Since every single one of the countless times that I've been here, there have been no bears. I walked towards what I thought was the mountain's trail, but instead walked into a clearing with a large scaly creature. "Begone, worthless human, you don't belong here," roared the green-scaled dragon. "Whoa. Are you a dragon?" I asked as I walked to touch it. Its mouth opened and snapped back down. "Don't dirty me with your mortal 𝗧𝗍𝗍𝗍, what are you doing?" I had noticed the sword in their back, and had started to climb up when they noticed. The last thing that I get to meet is a human, and they're climbing me. "Just great," the dragon sighed as I climbed onto its back. "This sword looks dangerous, want me to take it out?" I asked, caring about the creature's well-being. I was already touching the sword. "If you touch that god's sword, then you will become deranged." The dragon really didn't care what happened to me, it only wished for me to be gone. I put both of my hands on the sword and started to pull it out. Why are you helping me?" The dragon asked as she saw me pull the sword out of her back. "𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, I said in between grunts until I pulled the sword out. Once pulled, the sword disappeared. I jumped off of the dragon's back and went towards the snout. I sat down in a respecting manner and spoke. "You looked like you needed help." A warm smile formed at my lips. "Now if you don't mind me asking, who do I have the pleasure of speaking to?" I said as I was soaked through by the rain. A passive red light came from the dragon as it transformed into a human-like shape. The dragon was a girl with orange hair, red highlights, and horns on her head. She had a cloak on that covered most of her body, but by now it was also soaked through by the rain. She didn't seem to mind though. She sat down, the same fashion as I did, in front of me. "So you're a girl," I said, amazed, due to the fact that I couldn't tell her gender in her dragon form. "I thank you, O mortal scum, for saving the likes of me," she said as simply as she could, yet it sounded so sincere. A tick mark grew on my forehead. "You know you shouldn't really call people scum." "But you all are," she said happily with no remorse in her voice. Another tick mark grew. "Then what does that make me for helping you?" 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗍𝗍. She herself didn't even know what to call me. I fell on my face and onto the ground. Several hours later, After several hours of passionate talking and arguing, we both had calmed down. Even after spending several hours talking in the rain, you haven't told me your name. I said politely, my apologies, I am Toru. She said quickly and excitedly. Well, Toru, do you have any place to stay? I asked, and no, I've been by myself ever since I was little. I took in the information and her clothing. Well, how about you come home with me? She was taken aback, and I saw a tear in her eye, despite the small drizzle of rain. I awaited her response in the same position, just taking in the small amounts of refreshing rain. She looked at me with tears streaming out of her eyes. I do. She cried out through her tears. Well then, how about you become my dragon maid? I yelled out in excitement. I rambled on about maids. Damn it, Izuku, stop developing your mother's weird habits. Oh, sorry, but I forgot to tell you, my name is Izuku. It's been really nice to meet you, Toru. Let's get going then. I said excitedly. Her face had a tiny hint of sadness in her face, yet it was dominated by how happy she was. I got up and offered my hand to her. She had a confused look on her face. Come on, Toru, a new beginning awaits us, I said as I offered a smile of pure happiness. She took my hand and she smiled as well, an especially cute one at that. Part 1 Izuku POV. Bright light shined through my curtains as I lifted weights in my room. I noticed that she began to stir from her sleep. She rested on my bed, because I didn't have a spare mattress or futon. I rested on the floor. It was bad, albeit it was good for my back pains. She sat up and stretched. She let out a yawn. Good morning, Toru. She turned around and I fell backwards. My nose started to bleed. I had forgot that she didn't have clothing to wear. So currently she was naked. Izuku, are you alright? I heard footsteps approach me. I looked up and saw her hanging over my workout bench. But that wasn't all. She was still naked. My nose bled even more than before, practically gushing blood. I stood up as fast as I could. Let's get you some clothing, Toru, I unsteadily spoke. Here, just be back up a bit. I focused on the ceiling of the room. After she moved away from the bench, I moved it out from in front of my closet. I started to look through my closet for clothing that could fit her. Come on, where are you? There it is. I grabbed it and pulled it out of my closet. I held it up for her to see. This is the only thing that I have. Sorry if it doesn't fit you, I said nervously. Oh, I don't need this, Izuku. I looked at the back of the maid uniform with a skeptical look, and saw out of the corner of my eye her skin start to turn into dragon scales, and back into a maid uniform. For I can make my own, she said triumphantly. I looked at her elegant dress and my jaw dropped. Do you like it, 𝗵𝘃𝗲 Izuku? She asked excitedly. Even her dragon tail started to wag. First of all, please don't call me 𝗵𝘃𝗲. Second of all, you could say that I like it. I nervously scratched the back of my head and looked away from her, as to not insult how it looked like a cosplayer's outfit. I suppose that what I was going to give her was also cosplay. You look really cute in that dress though, I said. She gave off 𝗵𝘃𝗲𝗄 smile and pounced on top of me from where she was standing. You're so nice, Izuku. She nuzzled against my cheek. 𝗧𝗵𝗲𝗄. My stutter kicked up again, and I blushed like crazy. Yes, Izuku-sama. Please get off of me. Also, that's not any better than 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗲. Ah, maybe I want to call you 𝗧𝗏. She got off of me reluctantly. Now if you don't mind, I gotta start leaving for school, Toru. I'll be gone for half the day. Her face turned into one of sadness. But don't worry, I'll be back home before you know it. I smiled with reassurance. She looked at me and smiled weakly back. Okay, Izuku. Don't worry, I walked over to her and placed my hand on top of her head. I'll be fine. It's just school, so the only thing that'd ever happen is me dying of boredom. She giggled lightly and stood up. My hand stayed upon her head the entire time, so it was kinda awkward when my hand went slightly above my own head. Well, I gotta go. Goodbye, Toru. I walked towards my room door and waved behind me to Toru. Goodbye, Izuku, she smiled as I exited the room and eventually the house. Third-person POV. This is really boring, Toru said as she fell on top of Izuku's bed. Wait, I can just use my magic to visit Izuku in school, she exclaimed happily. She went to the front door and exited the house. But not without locking the door behind her. She went over to the barrier blocking people from falling from high heights and jumped off of it. Turning into a dragon, she flew through the air. She used her magic to conceal herself, and used her strong sense of smell to track him down. After a short bout of flight, she had made it to 𝗲𝗲𝗄𝗧 Junior High, where Izuku's scent was. She looked for an opening in the building to jump into, and found an open window that had Izuku's scent on it. She casually jumped into the building, and perched herself on the window. Looking in, she saw 3 people in the room, and one of them was Izuku. But he was being kicked by 2 other people, one with brown hair, and the other with sandy blonde. "You useless Deku, you aren't even fun to beat on anymore." The blonde kicked Izuku in the stomach, but it was odd. Izuku didn't try to defend himself. But Toru would. She lifted her concealment spell, and stepped onto some solid ground. Without making a sound, she made her way over to the brown-haired boy, and tapped him on the shoulder. "What the F?" he shouted in fright. "What the, who let you in here?" shouted the blonde-haired boy. He sent an explosive punch towards Toru, hoping that it would knock her out. But she grabbed his fist, and flung him over her shoulder. "I let myself in 'cause I wanted to see Izuku. But since you're hurting him..." 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗟𝗘, a green circle of magic appeared out of thin air, and Toru began to charge a beam of light in her mouth. The blonde-haired boy, himself in pure fright as he stayed in the same position, too scared to move. Toru, Izuku was next to her when he placed his hand on her shoulder in an injured stance. "You can't hurt Bakugo." The light coming out of her mouth stopped, and she directed her attention towards him. "But he hurt you, Izuku, you don't deserve anything like this." Bakugo slowly got up. A beam of light was shot from Toru's finger, barely missing his ear. "Don't you dare move," Toru said menacingly. "Just let him go, Toru, he's just a dumbass that doesn't understand what an ego is." Izuku stared directly into Bakugo's eyes as he spoke. "And what's that supposed to mean?" His hands started to release tiny sparks. "It means that you haven't been normal since the day you got your quirk. It changed you. You used to be my friend and said that you wouldn't stop being my friend. But no, your quirk made you think you were better than everyone else, Bakugo. And you lost sight of your true self, you lost sight of your past." By now Izuku was crying, while standing over Bakugo and scolding him. Bakugo's blonde hair shadowed his red eyes, but the sparks coming from his hands disappeared. "I am sorry, Izuku, you're sorry. You're saying sorry after 10 years of torment and pain. It has taken you this long to realize your mistakes." Izuku exploded on his old friend. "I could have defended myself every time you tried to hurt me, but I didn't. I hoped that you would notice how much pain you've caused your best friend." I said, "I'm sorry, Izuku." He looked up with tears coming down his face. Bakugo looked at him, not with pity, but with sorrow and pain. After 10 years, he finally realized the error of his ways. Izuku walked towards Bakugo and sat next to him. "I'm glad you finally said those words, old friend." Izuku smiled as tears came down his face. Later at home, "Izuku, can I ask you something?" I heard Toru ask as she prepared dinner. "Yeah, what is it?" "What's a quirk? Is it something like magic?" If I had to put it in simple terms. Yeah, it's like magic. It's basically a power that most people on this planet have. Do you have one? I went silent for a couple of moments. "Oh. I am quirkless, and because of it I'm treated worse than trash," I said solemnly. "Would you like to learn magic?" "You can do that." I pushed in my seat and ran into the kitchen. I looked at her with stars in my eyes. "Yeah, I can." She seemed nervous because of me. "Teach me." I got on my hands and knees and seemed like I was praying to her. Sure, Izuku, when do you want to do it?" she asked happily as I rose from the ground. "After dinner. Also, why are you cooking your own tail?" "Because I thought it would be nice to have a part of myself in you, Izuku." She was drooling from her mouth in a euphoric way. "I don't want to eat your tail, Toru," I said simply, causing her to seem sad. "I just don't feel comfortable with you cutting a part of yourself off and cooking it. It's just unethical." I got out ingredients for my signature dish, 𝗧𝗵𝗃. "But trust me, you are going to love what I'm making." After dinner in Izuku's bedroom, I was sitting behind Izuku and ready to give him magic. Whenever you're ready, Izuku, take off your shirt and stay still. He did as I instructed, and I summoned a purple magic circle that spanned across the entirety of the room. I placed my hand on his back and felt a tiny bit of my magic leave my body and start to reside in his. He doesn't seem to have anything of what's this? Is this his soul? If it is, then why does it seem to be huge and flowing with power? I don't think that I should bring this up, and there we go. I took my gloved hand off of his back. He turned around to look at me. You should be able to use dragon magic, Izuku, I said cheerfully. I saw a look of pure enjoyment in his eyes, but something unexpected happened. He hugged me. Thank you, Toru, he whispered passionately into my ear. My face grew to a dark shade of red as I blushed. Fire came out of my mouth. Why, you're welcome, Izuku, I said with a stutter. He really is cute when he's happy. I really want to stay in this dimension with him. Izuku POV, now what you want to do is imagine that there's a huge pool of stale water. That's the mana that I gave you. I'll be teaching you the advanced techniques later. You should be able to use the simple ones though. Now try to take some of that water and use it to produce fire. Toru cupped her hands together and blew fire from atop her trash heap. I wanted to try out my magic by using it on a people-barren place. And what better way than using it on a waste dump? I did as she said, and tried to take the water from the pool. I looked down into it, and saw that it was a fairly deep well of power. I reached in with one hand, and tried to take out the water. I only pulled out a little bit, and as soon as I did, it glowed and evaporated in an instant. What am I doing wrong? Just how much power does it take? I shouted at Toru. Not a lot, just try again. It's easy. She then breathed more fire than before and her body became scaly. See, it's not strong. I closed my eyes and saw the mana pool once again. Here we go again, I sighed as I reached into the pool with one hand. I left it in there for a few moments. Wait, why am I not using both hands? I cupped my hands within the water and brought it out. They were full of the glowing fluid. But this time, it didn't evaporate. Instead, it started to move on its own towards the veins in my arms. I started to panic, but I couldn't move for some reason. I looked down to see the fluid, having risen to my ankles somehow, hold them in place as if it were stone. The fluid cut through the skin on my arms and dug into my veins. I cried in pain because wherever it spread to, I started to glow blue and feel like I was burning from the inside out. As my entire body glowed, the feeling died down and slowly faded. I opened my eyes and looked at Toru. Why did that hurt so much? I sounded like a hollow version of myself, my voice was hoarse, and I was on the verge of tears. That means it worked. Cup your hands in front of your mouth. Then you should blow out fire if you think about it. Are you serious? That easy? She nodded, and so I did as she instructed. I cupped my hands and took a deep breath. Roar! A stream of fire came out of my throat and melted every object in front of me. And oh wait, this is awesome. I turned to Toru and kneeled. Teach me more, Toru was shocked and had a confused look on her face. Does this usually happen? No, but you better expect more of this. Okay then, I'll teach you more, she said happily. 3 weeks later, okay, Izuku. This time I want you to try going deeper into that pool of magic that I'm talking about. Then you should be able to use more powerful spells and abilities. But you really have been using the magic I gave you, like you've had it since birch. I couldn't make out the last part because she was speaking to herself. Already? Wouldn't that be tough? Of course, but the earlier you try, the easier it will get as time goes on. Okay, let's do it then. That's the spirit. She cheered on. Instead of being on top of a pile of trash, she was sitting in front of me. I closed my eyes again and wound up near the pool. But this time, it was deeper than my normal one. Oddies, it's supposed to grow deeper. To be honest, I still had the littlest idea about mana and magic. I only knew how to cast some basic dragon magic and a human spell as well. I still didn't know if I could turn my skin into scales like Toru had demonstrated many times before. I walked up to the pool that had accepted me once before and got ready to dive deeper. I knew that I wouldn't be able to touch the floor of the pool. I readied my pose and jumped into the fluid. I expected to be repulsed by the mana, but instead it fully accepted me. But it became weirder. I didn't even try to move, the mana pushed me down towards the basin. I heard Toru gasp, and so I opened my eyes in an instant. "What's wrong?" I asked urgently. She clutched her 𝗧𝗍𝗍, as if something had given her a fright. "Izuku, was there anything wrong with the pool I told you to envision?" "Why yeah, it was drastically deeper than normal. Is that not supposed to happen?" I was in the dark about magic entirely, so I had to ask. No wonder I felt weird. "You accessed my own reserves of mana," I looked surprised. "How? I thought I was bound to my own. Isn't that what you told me when we started?" She got up from the ground. Her maid outfit made her irresistible when she was confused. Or just in general. "Yeah, that's entirely right. But maybe it's because I gave you some of my own. I don't know, this is messing with my head. Can we just stop for now?" Her eyes seemed to emanate anguish within them. "Yes, sure, whatever you need." I got up. "Do you want to do something in the time being?" She walked next to me and started to blush. "Yeah, I'd like that, Izuku." She hugged my arm and nuzzled her cheek into it. I blushed lightly. I was getting used to this since we've been getting closer and closer by the day. "So, Toru, do you really want to shop?" She nodded. "Of course, I made a promise to be your maid, and I'm not letting it go." "Geez, you really don't have to do it though. I felt bad since I saved her and made her be a maid. But I really don't mind as long as I get to spend my time with you." My face grew scarlet, and I wanted to hide away like the social outcast I was. But I felt the same way about her. I was way too scared to tell her that. Someone bumped into Toru, making her drop the meat she was going to make dinner with. "Stop that man!" a woman shouted from behind us. "I got it." I started to use my mana to power up my legs in order to run at him. "Stop," Toru said. She was looking down at the ground. "Why? I'll take care of him." She turned towards me with a mad look in her eye. Fine, just don't kill him." I knew this could easily turn out horrible. "This," Toru appeared above the man that stole the purse, "is for Izuku-san." She did a 360 in midair and punched the man into the ground. Leaving a small crater where he landed, he bounced up once and fell back down. She touched the ground gracefully and picked up the purse. "Thank you so much." Toru handed back the purse, and I came over to her. "Good job, Toru." I placed my hand on her head and ruffled it. "I've had enough, let's just go home." She looked at me all happy, like I would be doing something that I had no want of doing. "And I'll be making dinner," I added, her mood deflated, probably because she would find a way in order to feed me her tail. "Like always." "Fine, but I will make it up to you tomorrow." She raised her fist into the sky. "Even if it's the last thing I do." It was the last thing she did. I was making dinner when the doorbell to my apartment rang. "Oh, you're already on it." I was chopping away at my own freshly grown tomatoes. I heard the sound of the door opening over my humming. "Oh, hi Kanna, what brings you here?" I heard the door close and a pair of running footsteps. I looked to where Kanna was and saw a little girl with a tail that resembled a fuzzy ball on a string. "Give back 𝗧𝗏 or face my wrath." "Sorry, Kanna-chan." But I didn't force Toru to stay. She completely wanted to. I was still chopping away. "Then perish." I looked at her as she ran towards me. I put one hand up to my mouth and quickly tossed the knife into the air. I quickly put my other hand over my mouth and tightened both of them. I breathed fire and melted the knife into nothing but molten drippings. Kanna-chan was preparing what looked like a strong attack. But when she finally released it, it felt like a little kid's punch. Completely weak and yet cute. She then unleashed a flurry of punches on my legs. "Kanna-chan, stop that right now." Toru picked the small child up and pulled her away from viciously attacking my legs. "What's her deal?" I asked Toru. "It's because you won't return 𝗧𝗏 to me." Toru looked down at her like a parent. "Kanna, I won't go with you back to our realm. I want to stay here with Izuku." Kanna struggled against her superior grip. "Get rid of your brainwashing powers, you useless human, or I'll kill you, 𝗵𝘃𝗏 𝗧𝗟𝗘." A loud grumble broke through the tension. Kanna looked embarrassed. "You sound hungry. Here, just give me a few moments to put the finishing touches on this." Then we could see about returning Toru to you. I asked 𝗂𝗃 on one knee. She reluctantly nodded. All right then. Let's get this started. I shuffled the headband I had around my neck onto my forehead and tightened it. I turned my hand into a sharp edge and chopped the tomatoes into bite-sized pieces. I took the meat that was dropped on the ground earlier, luckily inside a strong packaging, and cooked it with my fiery breath. I then chopped, sliced, and diced the meat into small squares, small enough to be bite-size and tender enough to be somewhat tough to chew. I divided the meat evenly onto 2 separate dishes and put the finishing touches on it with the tomatoes and parsley I had left over. Dinner, I placed the plates in front of the 2. Is served. 𝗂𝗃 eyed the food hungrily as if I poisoned it. Go ahead, it's safe to eat. See, Toru took a bite of it and went into pure delight. Her face lit up because of the masterful flavor that I always had present within my food. She took a bite of the food in front of her carefully and had a similar reaction to Toru's. How do you two like it? They looked at me with smiles on their faces. It's amazing, but what about you, Izuku? I'm fine, just as long as I see a smile on somebody's face, then I don't care if I'm hungry or not. I saw her reaching for her oversized yet cute dragon tail. And no, I don't want to eat your tail, Toru, I scolded lightly. I looked to 𝗂𝗃, who had already finished half of her plate. So I take it you like it? I asked smugly. Don't think your tricks will work on me, weak human. I just like your food is all weak. I'm not weak, Izuku. 𝗂𝗃-san, you've been here for a couple of days. Shouldn't your parents be worried about you? She was sitting in Toru's lap on the couch, and I was in the kitchen, cooking fish with the oven's flame. When I made dinner yesterday, I almost burned the apartment down with my fiery breath. I noticed that her gaze darkened, and she moved Toru's hand from giving her head pats. You have people who worry about you in your own dimension, right? She moved herself off of Toru's lap and adjusted herself towards me. She opened her mouth, and light started to come out of it. My eyes widened, and I quickly ducked under the counter. Overhead a beam of light soared and cut a hole through the wall. I grabbed the counter and slowly peered over it. 𝗂𝗃 was now standing, crying, and Toru was hugging her. I looked behind me and saw straight to the outdoors. I looked back as I heard Toru's voice comforting her. It's all right, 𝗂𝗃. If you want to, you can tell me what's bugging you. I wanted to comfort her, but I knew that I would only make the situation worse. She turned towards the elder dragon and whispered something into her ear. I used magic to transform one of my ears into that of a bat. It's just that your father exiled me, Toru gasped relatively loudly, causing me to hold my ear in response. Why did he? She seemed rather angry at the mention of that. Because I pulled a small prank, she seemed like she is dancing around the truth. So just because of that, my dad banished you? She clenched her hand into a fist and started to glow red. I'm gonna kill that man one day. Have your parents tried to reason with him? 𝗂𝗃 shut her mouth, and tears started to come out faster. My eyes widened once again. What happened to her parents? 𝗂𝗃-chan, what happened to your parents? She said with urgency on her tongue. I got up from my cover and started to walk towards them. I fell on my knees in front of 𝗂𝗃 and leaned in to hug her. It's okay, 𝗂𝗃-chan, you don't have to say it. I knew what had happened to her parents. They were either dead or murdered. She collapsed on the ground and bawled her eyes out, crying out in pain. After several minutes of crying, she wasn't crying as much. Hey, 𝗂𝗃-chan. Since you can't go back home, how about you stay here with me and Toru? I guarantee you'll love it here. She stopped crying entirely, and I felt her head move in my direction. I saw out of the corner of my eye, Toru look at me like she did when I first met her a couple months ago. That was a face stricken with love. Ah, really? She asked, her voice was choking up. Of course, 𝗂𝗃. I pulled out of the hug and smiled at her. Her eyes lit up with joy. I stood up followed by the 2 dragonkin. She jumped from where she stood and tackled me into a hug. I was surprised, so I fell backwards. Thank you, Izuku-san. You're an awesome person, said 𝗂𝗃, since she was the one hugging me. I saw Toru look at us with a wide smile that stretched ear to ear, plastered onto her face. I blushed and smiled as well. I then pat 𝗂𝗃's head, like you should do to any loli who likes them. She really loved it judging her reaction, but I had to get up. Since Toru was going into the kitchen with a severed tail. Sorry Kanna-chan Toru. I got up and ran towards her. I turned the corner and saw her holding her tail above the cooking fish. A liquid was seeping from the severed tail onto the fish, making it inedible. I pinched the bridge of my nose and sighed. Toru, you know I won't ever eat your tail. I went to the fridge and onto the tips of my toes. I opened the cabinet above it and grabbed the bottle filled with water. So then why do it? I sprayed her with the water. She really hated it when I did this. But she always seemed like a cat when she gets spritzed. I heard laughter come from the other room, and could tell that she'd love it here with Toru and Izuku. I heard running from Kanna's room. I looked towards the hallway. She came in sliding and almost hitting the wall, but she saved herself at the last moment and ran towards me on the couch. Since Toru was more than capable by now, she was cooking lunch for the first time. Yes, Kanna? I asked as she stopped in front of me, so I pat her head. I'm bored, is there anything I can do? I thought for a moment and had a brilliant idea. How about we go eat lunch at the park that's nearby? It would be fun. Her eyes became wide and bright. I'll take that as a yes. Now, go get ready while me and Toru get everything set up. She nodded fast and ran back to the room I gave her. I got up from the couch and walked to the kitchen. Why are you so nice, Izuku? I just haven't met too many humans like you. I just don't see the point of being rude or mean to someone, even if you're fed up with them. I guess that's why. I don't really know. I shrugged and looked at the sandwiches she was preparing. They didn't have the meat from her tail, but it was something that I couldn't recognize. What's in those? I looked at her and saw her blushing and holding her maid dress. It's a delicacy from my home world. I believe it's overgrown snake meat. Realizing what she had just said, she deadpanned, knowing that I probably wouldn't try it. Sounds odd, but I'll give it a try. Put it in here. I pulled out a picnic basket from the cabinet below and went to grab some assorted fruit off the counter. I turned around to see Kanna walking in place in the doorway. Let's go. I could tell that she was going to have a blast in the park already. You ready, Toru? She nodded, so I turned back to Kanna. Then let's get going. I went over towards the front door and slipped on my shoes. I grabbed the doorknob and opened the door. The sun poured in through the door. It was bountiful and appealing. So I stepped out and basked in the brilliance of the sun. I turned around to the two. Well, what are you waiting for? Let's get going. Kanna ran out the door and stood at my side. She peered over the rail and saw the same bright sunny day that I did. Toru came holding the basket, so I took it from her, like the gentleman I was. I led the way to the park, and we were talking the entire time we walked there. Here should be perfect. I set the basket down in the shade of the tree and opened it. I took the blanket out of it and sprawled it across the ground. I sat down on it, and Toru sat next to me, rather closely I might add. But so did Kanna by sitting in my lap. Toru opened the basket and pulled out the sandwiches. I heard footsteps on the grass and looked towards it. It was Katsuki, so I waved at him. But Toru was growling like a dog at him. So I grabbed her hand and held it, making her look me in the face with a light blush. It's okay, he won't hurt me. Deku, I need to talk to you, so come on. He waved me on as he walked away. I picked up Kanna by the waist and moved her beside me. I'll be back in a few, so don't wait up. I called as I ran to catch up with him. So what did you want to talk about, Kakin? I know that you can't forget what happened between us in the past, but I just want things to go back to normal. I want to be friends again, so I hope you can find enough sympathy in your heart to forgive me. He was in a position that was generally used for praying to a god or deity. Haha, I genuinely laughed, causing him to clench his fists and tear handfuls of grass out of the ground. When did we ever stop being friends, Kakin? You may have hurt me. But you and me are still humans, and we make mistakes, and become blind to what we do or have done. At least you realize what you've done, and are trying to make up for it like any decent person. He breathed a sigh of relief and got up from his position. I don't understand how easy you can forgive a person, it just amazes me. He stood up, it amazes me too. But I have a question for you, would you like to join us in eating lunch? He scoffed, but still nodded his head. Alright. Then you can finally meet my new family. I took his arm and pulled him along. I sat him down across from me. 𝗂𝗵𝗲 and Toru, meet 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗲. 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗲 meet 𝗂𝗵𝗲 and Toru. Toru scoffed while 𝗂𝗵𝗲 just smiled and waved at him, so he did it back. Toru, I know that the two of you got off on the wrong foot, but I hope you can forgive what he did to me. She did budge, so I got up in her face. Please. I gave her puppy dog eyes and begged. She sighed. Fine, I'll get to know him, but I won't forgive what he did to my Izuku. She hugged me and shoved my face into her 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗲. I wildly blushed and tried to push myself out, but her strength was too much. I heard a thud on the ground from behind my back. When she let me out, I took in a deep breath and tried to hide my entirely steaming face. I looked to see Katsuki with one of his legs in the air and one of his arms twitching. All the while Toru was laughing happily, mainly because she could tell that even though I was usually stoic and brave around her, that she could make it all crumble within a moment, just by putting my face between her melons. Meanwhile, 𝗂𝗵𝗲 was eating a sandwich and looking at kids having fun, not paying any attention to the three of us. Izuku POV. 𝗂𝗵𝗲 was laying across my lap, completely tired for a reason I didn't know. Izuku-san, she picked her head up and looked at me. Yes. Can I ask you for something? I nodded. Sure, what is it? Can I go to school? How did she learn about school? May I ask why? Her eyes lit up like stars, because it seems like fun. I also want to see my friend more, so that's how she knows. That makes sense. Sure, 𝗂𝗵𝗲, just let me see when it starts. She got up off my lap and ran into her room. I pulled out my phone, and after a couple hours of research, at last that's what it felt like. I found that the nearest school that she would go to would be starting 2 days from now. The same time as the entrance exam for UA. Sweat dropped from my forehead. Is something wrong, Izuku? Toru walked into the living room with a tray. She set it down and I knew it was my favorite coffee. Yes, there is. I grabbed the mug and took a sip of the scalding liquid. Thank you. She smiled and took a seat next to me. You know how 𝗂𝗵𝗲 wants to go to school? I asked. I took another sip, and it scalded me again. I think so. Why? It's 2 days away, and it's on the same day as my entrance exam for UA. I don't even know how I'm going to get her into the school in such a short time. I slumped down on the couch, not moving my arms from the same position they were in, 'cause I didn't want to burn myself. And I know that she really wants this to happen. What am I supposed to do, Toru? I sighed and put my drink down. Don't worry, Izuku, you'll find a way, I just know it. I looked at her cute roundish face, admiring her smile and her cute orange-yellow eyes. I rubbed my face. Yeah, you're right. I drank the rest of my coffee, ignoring the burning pain that was going down my throat. Delicious. 𝗂𝗵𝗲, get ready to go shopping. I shouted, but kept my voice down as to not annoy my fellow neighbors. I stood up and walked to the front door. I slipped on my shoes as soon as I saw 𝗂𝗵𝗲 come around the corner with a raincoat on. It's raining. Ding. I grabbed the umbrella that was hanging up. I then put on a sweatshirt and grabbed my wallet on the shoe closet. Can we go, Izuku-san? I put my hand on her head. Of course, 𝗂𝗵𝗲. You ready, Toru? She walked around the corner and had a different maid outfit on, one that looked like it was made of RBB. Yeah, let's go, Izuku. I opened the front door and stepped out into the walkway of the complex to see the rainy skies. We walked down and exited the complex. I opened the umbrella and hung it over me and Toru, since 𝗂𝗵𝗲 had one of her own. That'll be 14392. 19 yen, $100, sir. Will you be paying with cash or card? I pulled out my wallet and took out the card my mother gave me and swiped it. After a few moments the machine accepted it and spat out a receipt. Thank you for shopping. Have a great rest of your day. I grabbed the several bags full of school supplies. A good day to you as well. I walked out of the shop and headed to where Toru and 𝗂𝗵𝗲 were. I walked in to see them looking for a backpack for 𝗂𝗵𝗲 to use. Yo, how's it going? 𝗂𝗵𝗲 turned around with a bag in her hands. Oh, so you like this one? Great choice. If I could I would have used that as well. The bag was a simple one. It wasn't too bright or too dull. It was perfect for her, a simple red bag. She gave it to me and I went to the counter with it. Will this be all? I looked to Toru and Kanna, and saw that she had stars in her eyes as she stared at the metallic emblem. 1 second please, I walked over to them. Which one do you want, Kanna-chan? She gasped, and pointed to a dragon that was oddly similar to Toru's dragon form. This one. Yes. Her eyes were bright and cute. All right then, I walked back to the counter with the emblem. Thank you, have a good rest of your day. Especially you, you cutie. She looked to Kanna, and looked like she was going to pinch her cheeks. You too. Kanna took the bag and put it on. Her eyes lit up. I could tell that she was going to love school. Aim, aim, aim. I heard Kanna say as she walked in place, she really loves the rain. We were almost home, and were waiting for the crosswalk to activate when Toru latched onto my arm for some reason. I looked at her, and looked behind her to see 2 men behind her. They looked like your friendly neighborhood. May I help you too? This is the man you were talking about dating. He's a huge effin' dash. Take Kanna and go home, I'll be back in a few. She looked at me weirdly, 'cause she hadn't seen this side of me, my more serious side. But she still listened, and took Kanna across the street, when the crosswalk was activated. You don't want your girlfriend to dump you, so you sent her home. You are AF nerd. The one on the left put his hand on my shoulder, and was obviously taller than me. You made a big mistake, now you have to pay. He and his buddy picked me up and brought me to the alley behind me. I hit the wall they threw me at, and slumped down emotionless. I heard the sound of something sharp being released, and a switchblade was held against my throat. You ruined my chance at scoring a Real Beauty, now you'll pay with your BLD. He pressed the knife against my throat, and slit either, so he thought. He expected there to be BLD spilling from my throat, but he pulled his blade away, to find it broken. I stood up, pushing his hand off of me, and looked at him as my skin turned to green scales, just like Toru's. I breathed a small amount of fire out of my mouth. Embers fell to the ground as the 2 men took fighting stances. I walked closer to them as things caught on the ground set on fire, showing off the 2's quirks. The one that stabbed me had metal circling around him in a liquid form, the other one had a gun, but it looked futuristic and abnormal. I continued walking as they shot bullets at me, and tried to get under my scales with the metal liquid. I grabbed the gun wielder's neck, and threw him down into the ground, knocking him out. My fist started to burn, when I punched the second one in the face, also knocking him out. Next time, you shouldn't swear around children, nor harass my maid. Why, you'll be sorry, the Yakuza won't forget, said the one with the gun. I originally thought he was out cold. So I kicked him upside the head, and walked back out of the alley with my skin back to normal. I'm home. I called out as I opened the front door. Kanna came running from her room with her backpack on. Izuku, Izuku. She showed me her bag in all of its glory. It had the dragon on it and everything, adding to how cute she was. Ah, you're so cute. I held my cheek and saw Toru come up to her. She whispered something, and Kanna started to take off her backpack. She handed it to Toru and she put it on. How do I look, Izuku? My gaze darkened. There's too much going on. As the day went on, and it turned to night, Kanna wore the backpack the entire time, even as she slept. She seems to love it, doesn't she? Asked Toru. Kanna turned and tossed in her bed trying to find the perfect position, when she threw it off of her onto the ground. I sighed and closed the door to her room. 2 days later, I had on my outfit I was going to wear for the exams, and Kanna was ready for school. Ready? I asked her. She slipped on her shoes that she usually wore, and nodded in delight. All right then. Since her school was on the way to UA, I decided I would walk her there. Toru, I don't really need you to do much. I should be home at 12 o'clock before Kanna gets back from school. So do whatever, I don't really care, just don't be doing weird things with the stuff in my room. She nodded, but I knew she would do exactly that. Toru POV. The first thing I did when Izuku left was go into his room. I've been in there plenty of times, but the most notable was the first night I was here. So being the good maid I was, I took it out of the closet and dusted it off. Something compelled me to open it, and so I did. Inside was a black book, so I took it and flipped it open to a random page. There were photos of Izuku as a baby, being held by a red-haired woman and a man with black hair and green highlights in it. Beside it was the caption of, "First family photo." 𝗵𝗃𝗃 Kobayashi, Kaori Kobayashi, and Izuku Kobayashi. This was the first of many pictures of Izuku. But after Izuku had his 4th birthday, his dad had suddenly disappeared from all of the rest of the photos. I noticed that the box was partially open at the bottom, so I moved it to the side to see a photo of his dad, a really up-close one as well. I picked it up from the bottom of the box and turned it around. There were words written in black marker. In loving memory of 𝗵𝗃𝗃, he was too young to be taken from this wonderful world. 2098 to 2130, you were the light of my life. It was written in feminine handwriting, and there were tear stains marking it. I placed it back down as tears filled my eyes, and closed the box after putting the album back in. Tears gathered in my eyes. I don't think I'll come back in here without him. I placed it back in the closet, and went back to the living room area to work on something that has taken me a while to make. Izuku POV. I was walking to UA by myself because Kanna's friend had appeared, so she started walking with her. I was at the gates of UA, admiring at how appealing the school was, when I saw someone trip. I quickly lit my legs on fire, when the girl started to float after touching her fingers together. The flames faded away, and I walked to the front doors. Entering the building was even more amazing. There was a large gathering of people in one space, but I had to sit in the seat I was given. Once at my seat, I noticed I would be sitting next to Katsuki. Ever since Toru came, we've been mending our friendship ever since. Kaken, he looked at me and scoffed. You ready to pass the exams? Of course. With my quirk, it'd be almost impossible to lose. His hands started to spark, and his seat caught fire due to them. Quickly eyed the growing flames up. They tasted like smoke, so I coughed a bit. He looked at me as if I wasn't human. You never told me about you being able to eat fire. Why? He asked sarcastically. Sorry, cough. I didn't think it was necessary. Cough. Embers came out of my mouth as I coughed. The light started to dim, so I sat down, still coughing up a storm, when a man walked onto the center platform. Izuku sat next to his friend of 15 years, coughing, when a man with a ridiculous head of blonde hair walked onto the center stage. Yo! How is everyone doing today? He held his arms up in a cool fashion expecting a response, but the whole crowd was silent, not a single noise, except the chirping of a cricket or several. Tough crowd, he said to someone behind the stage curtains. Anyways, who's ready for how this works? Yet again silence swept through the crowd of 1,000 or so 15-year-olds. Let me explain. There are 3 types of robots to get points from. The screen that was behind him suddenly lit up. There were 4 silhouettes on it though, as opposed to the 3 he said. Meanwhile, Izuku was literally dying due to the smoke he inhaled, causing the people in the surrounding area to look at him like he was crazy. They all have different difficulty levels, and depending on how strong they are, the more points you are awarded for destroying them. 3 robots appeared where the shadows were. As you can see, they all have paint on the side of their bodies in the shape of a number. The 3-point robot is the hardest to defeat, while the easiest one to defeat is the 1-pointer. Any questions? Yes, you there. Izuku looked up to where he was pointing. His coughing fit had started to diminish. But there was a boy. He was rather strict looking, so he wasn't really questioning of it. Sir, it says here on the pamphlet that there are 4 types of robots. If this is a mistake, then it'll be a huge embarrassment for you. Also, you there in the green outfit, his arm robotically in the direction of Kaken and Izuku. Confused, Izuku pointed to himself, earning the nod of the boy's head. You've been coughing since this whole thing started. If you are sick, then I genuinely think you should leave. Or if you're trying to interrupt the people around you, then get out. Izuku was about to say something to the prick, so he tried to stand up from his seat. But he was restricted by Kaken's arm. Since you got a problem with my friend, how about you sit down and shut the foo dash? That's enough. Participant 1047 and 184. Jeez. To answer your first question, participant 1047, it is not a mistake. You just didn't let me finish. The boy bowed in apology and sat back down in his seat. Now, there is a 4th type of robot. But it isn't worth any points. If anything, it's more of a hazard. The screen behind him changed to show a large robot. Scratch that, a colossal one. It was next to a person, and it was 203 6-foot people. So try to avoid this hunk of metal and wiring, since there is absolutely no way a person can take this down. Now, it's time for the written exam. I hope you brought your pencils with you, 'cause you'll need it. People came around passing papers to Izuku's row, and were slowly making their ascent to the entrances. Now that the written exam is done, there is a paper under your seats regarding where you'll be taking the exams at. Good luck. Izuku and Katsuki reached under their seats like it was an episode of Oprah. I'm in Psych Gamma, what about you, Kaken? He started to read his paper as if he was misreading it somehow. I think I'm in Alpha. Dsmin, I wanted to beat the SHT out of your score, but I wouldn't know. You better pass the exams, Izuku, or I'll be. He walked off, splicing seamlessly with the wave of people leaving. Alright Kaken, I will, and I'll beat you. A fire raged in the back of Izuku's mind, one that had yet to be extinguished. This is his determination to do anything. 'Cause once he sets his mind to it, he'll get it done, no matter the cost. He walked out of the building, and made his way to the bus that was supposed to take him to Psych Gamma. Izuku sat down in the back of the bus, where nobody noticed his ever-darkening gaze, for nobody here stood a chance against him. Wow, the guy sitting in the back of the bus is such a loser, a snooty-sounding girl said within Izuku's earshot. He didn't move his gaze to look at them, but his dragon magic slowly started up, his hands started to grow into claws, but he had no idea this was happening. It all disappeared as soon as he calmed down. He only relaxed because the two girls were intimidated by his figure, which was odd since he knew he wasn't that scary. Hey, Izuku looked up to the voice. It was the brown-haired girl with a bob cut. Do you mind if I sit next to you? 'Cause there aren't any more seats here. Izuku nodded, and the girl sat next to him. Knowing that she wouldn't try to talk to him, Izuku went back to focusing on nothing in order to meditate. The bus slowed to a stop in front of a city, and people had started to get off, so Izuku stood up. Good luck, he said monotonously to the girl that was sitting with him, and started to walk off of the bus. Standing in front of the huge gates that led into the city, he marveled at how huge they were. He waited around for a few moments, when the guy who called him out was suddenly in front of him. Oh, hello. Izuku hadn't a clue as to why the guy was here. Are you sure that you are all right? The boy had bluish hair and boxy glasses. Yeah, I just upped the flames from my friend's quirk. Oh, I apologize for what I said earlier. Best of Lou Dash. The blue-haired boy looked to where the noise came from. What are you waiting for? There aren't countdowns for villain battles. The boy looked to where Izuku just was, to find a couple of cuts into the side of the bus. What is actually wrong with the kid, defacing private property like that? For shame, he was running through the now open gates to the city as he thought this. Back with Izuku, he was running through the city, with a culminative amount of 16 points, from destroying 4 3-pointers, 1 2-pointer, and 2 1-pointers. Where are more robots? 'Cause at this point, I'm going to pass. He gripped one of the robot's heads and crushed it instantly with his hand. The robot short-circuited and exploded as Izuku walked away. Now I'm at 24 points. This is too easy. He ran out onto an empty block of the city, and saw a beam of light going into the sky, with robots surrounding it, so he jumped straight into the fray. He landed next to the beam, which was apparently a kid using his quirk, but Izuku didn't care. His hands caught on fire as well as his legs, crushing 𝗧𝗏 of the fire dragon. He shouted as he sank his fiery hands into one of the robots. The fire left his body and went into the robot, being passed down to each and every one, destroying them in mere moments. Those were mine. The blonde boy whined. Well, if they were yours, then why didn't I see your name on them? Izuku turned around. He saw that the boy was frightened by something, but he didn't know, so he walked away, leaving the kid sigh in relief. Izuku looked everywhere as he ran, looking for any robot to destroy, but there was nothing until. This exam isn't fun enough, said someone in the dark of an observation room. So let's spice it up. He slammed his fist down onto a button that released something in the city. The ground around Izuku had started to rise. He had no clue what was going on, but the tremors from it were keeping him down. What is going on? He said shakily. The ground was rising, and for some reason his body was in pain for no reason. The ground beneath him finally broke away, and he was thrown to the side by whatever came out. He was about to get up from where he landed, but a piece of the building above him broke away. Izuku quickly cupped his hands and tried to melt it with his fire breath, but nothing came out. Instead, he saw his hands start to turn into claws, and in the puddle next to him, he could see that his face was more dragon-like, with scales and everything. The rubble fell on top of him, but was broken in half by Izuku sitting there. He stood up amidst the dust and rubble, looking at the colossal robot moving through the city. Relatively fast. He walked emotionlessly towards it, when fire suddenly roared to life on and around the boy. You could physically see his eyes change from a human's eyes to a reptile's eyes, with slits as well. I looked at my dragon-like hands, and back at the robot. I knew what to do, so I walked in the opposite direction. Help! I heard. The scream was hurting my now sensitive ears. I turned around faster than ever, and jumped towards the robot. I punched through its 𝗧𝗍𝗃, and noticed that everything around me was melting due to my presence. Roar of the fire dragon. I tilted my head up, and released more fire than I have ever shot out at once, completely decimating its head, and sending a tornado of fire into the air. I closed my mouth, took a deep breath, and focused on my own hand, as if to slip from reality and hear the voice again. I jumped out of its body and fell to the ground, where there was a large amount of rubble, and heard the faint coughing and slight breathing of someone. I looked to see the brown-haired girl. She was under rubble that was near where the robot would fall. I walked over to her as the robot fell, crushing 𝗬𝗨𝗧𝗟𝗘. Of the fire dragon, I jumped up and kicked the robot in the 𝗧𝗍𝗃 with a fiery leg, causing it to fall in the opposite direction. I landed once again and made my way over to the girl. I took the rubble off of her and heard the running of someone and an engine behind them. I picked her up and turned around to see the blue-haired boy again. Hey, take her! I collapsed onto my knees out of exhaustion and felt the girl be taken from me as my consciousness faded. His skin started to turn back to normal, and the air around him became cooler. Izuku had just unlocked the dragon's worst friend, the power to be human and partially transform into a dragon. This was a technique practiced and created by dragon slayers, called Dragon Force. For some reason, Toru had been practicing dragon slayer magic, which was a taboo for dragons to learn, since it was forbidden by the Chaos and Light Order of Dragons leaders. For some reason, he had been compatible with it and learned to be a dragon slayer, but he isn't the only dragon slayer on this earth. Izuku's eyes fluttered open. He felt weak and was dazed for some reason. He sat up in the bed that he was in, even though he remembered being in the city for the entrance exam. My head as he swung his legs over the side of the cot and stood tall. He placed his hand on a table nearby as his vision became distorted. Once that cleared over, he walked over to the exit of the nurse's office. A door opened in front of him, and a tiny old lady walked out of it. Oh dear. Kiddo, you should be resting. You took on the zero-pointer robot and looked like you took some damage trying to destroy it. She sounded worried for Izuku's health, which was abnormal for him. Sorry, but I'm perfectly fine, miss. There's no pain at all. Just tired. Izuku responded to the lady. That's because of my quirk at H-. Izuku interrupted her. Are you the pro hero recovery girl? He asked excitedly. He loved heroes as a child and his mother only encouraged his mindset even more. Why yes I am. Seems like you live heroes dearie, she commented. Your quirk heals wounds rapidly by raising the natural recovery of the person. It uses up the stamina of the person though, and could possibly lead to the person's death. So then why did you use it on me? Izuku asked. Oh, because it only healed up minor wounds. There weren't any ones that put your life at stake so it wouldn't kill you. She said happily, which creeped Izuku out because of how morbid she sounded. But if you feel fine you can head back home. There's someone waiting for you at the front gates as well. Who could be waiting for me, Tor? Kaken. Kanna. Kanna doesn't even make sense. She has no clue where this place is. Izuku thought as he walked out of her office and towards the front gates of the school. As the gates came into view, so did the person, someone he didn't know. As he approached the gates, he could see a blonde-haired woman with brown eyes, in a blue skirt and white shirt. Are you Izuku Kobayashi? She asked when she noticed him. Izuku nodded. Who is this person and why is she looking for me? I worked with your father when he was Alevite. It was great to help him as a hero. But the reason I'm here is before your father died, he wanted me to tell you something. I've been trying to track you down ever since. It was kinda strong to convince Kaori that I was working with 𝗵𝗃𝗲 though. She then scratched the side of her head. How was Dad before he died? Izuku asked. His mother had left him to mourn by herself. Thus the reason he has an entire apartment for himself, but his father had died when he was 12 and his mother visited at least 4 times a year. He fought valiantly against an evil that was fated to rise every 100 years, and he gave his life for me to seal it away. He was an amazing person and seemed like a great dad. She said politely. Evil. Mom never told me about this. Maybe I should ask her the next time she's here. Thank you, Miss. Sorry, but I don't really know your name. Dad never brought home any work stories for us. Oh right, I'm Lucy Heartfilia. She then bowed, revealing a small snowman on her back. Poo. It then waved at Izuku and disappeared as Lucy came back up. What was that? He asked. Say hello to Nicholas. She had a silver key in one hand and the snowman being in the other. Oh. Is this magic? Izuku asked, since he knew that this couldn't be a quirk and his father had tried to teach him his style of magic when he was younger and wouldn't be getting a quirk. So he tried everything but found out that his son had no aptitude for any magic or mana. Yes, it is. Now, let's get down to why I'm here. Do you mind if we start to walk to your home? Sure, responded Izuku as he led the way to his home, where Kanna should be now because of school being out. Izuku, your father knew you would grow to be a strong man, and I'm guessing that he knew you would learn magic if he sacrificed himself. What I'm here for is to ask you for help. I thought you wanted to tell me something that my dad said? Izuku asked. He was walking side by side with Lucy as he went home. I know, and this is what he wanted. She exclaimed. Even Nicholas, who was on her head, exclaimed it in his own little language. What is it? He wanted me to see how powerful you have grown, since you have what seems to be Dragon Slayer magic, or a powerful fire-based quirk. He didn't really tell me the details. She trailed off. Okay, how about now, on a beach that I cleaned up recently? Izuku asked. He didn't know what Dragon Slayer magic was, but it did sound powerful, like it was the opposite of what he called his magic, which was dragon magic, and it had a certain luster that compels him to call it that. Sounds great. Izuku pulled out his phone in response, and dialed his home phone, hoping somebody would pick up. Hello, who is this? Toru asked calmly on the other end of the phone. It's Izuku. Izuku. Where have you been? I've been worried sick, she said to him. Don't worry, I'm fine, but I'll be out for an hour or so please take care of Kanna and the house in my stead. Alright, see you later, Izuku. She sounded sad, like she's been wanting to see Izuku, like she missed him. She hung up the phone, and Izuku put his away. Who was that? Lucy asked as Izuku stopped in front of the beach. That was my maid. It felt weird to call Toru a maid. She was more like a friend, or even a mentor. Maybe Izuku was lying to himself, and was trying to cover up his feelings for her. That one is the most probable. Anyways, let's get this started, Lucy. I'll show you my true strength. Izuku stood directly across from Lucy, in a fighting stance, all the while she was looking for the perfect keys to fight him with. She had the keys in her hand. Witness the power of celestial spirit magic. Gate of the lion, I open thee. Gate of the maiden, I open thee. Virgo. 2 poofy white clouds appeared out of nowhere, and 2 people came out of them, one in a suit with orange hair, and the other in a maid outfit and pink hair. You called me my queen? Asked the pink-haired one as she bowed. Yo, Lucy, long time no see. The other one said, Virgo, how many times must I tell you not to call me queen? I'm doing fine, Leo, but there's a reason as to why I called you. It's time to fight. They turned around and looked at Izuku. Is this the kid of Kimmy? Asked Leo and Virgo at the same time. Lucy nodded. Kimmy asked me to test his son's strength when he was 15. So, you ready, Izuku? She asked him. Yeah? His fists lit on fire and he put them together. Whoa. He's a dragon slayer. Leo asked as he shuddered a small amount, as if he was scared in the past by one. Yes, just treat him as if he were 𝗤𝗓𝗄 or Wendy. Now let's do this. Lucy's clothing suddenly changed into more revealing ones, and she also had a glowing 𝗬𝗓𝗄𝗏 that never seemed to be constantly moving in a vortex. Izuku paid no attention, not even a blush, to how much her melons were revealed, because he didn't care for her body. Leo then fired a flare-like thing from his hands, and blinded Izuku with it. When his vision came back, 𝗲𝗏 was gone, and the duo was about to attack him. He cupped his hands over his mouth. Roar of the fire dragon. A vortex of fire shot out of his mouth, and the two narrowly dodged the attack. Talon of the fire dragon, he shouted as he kicked the ground beneath him, causing 𝗲𝗏 to come out in a daze. Leo was running at him with a ringed fist. When it started to glow and become icy, he launched his attack and hit Izuku's chin. He countered with a fiery fist to his stomach, causing him to cough up blood and fly through the air. Wing slash of the fire dragon. He jumped up and elbowed Leo into 𝗲𝗏 and Lucy. He was knocked out and went back to his home. Izuku landed on the ground. "You're strong, Izuku," Lucy said. She was weakened, just like 𝗲𝗏, and couldn't fight after getting hit with a man. "Thanks, you too." He couldn't really call her strong since the fight didn't last long, but regardless he held his hand out for her to get back up. She took it and fell into Izuku, knocking him into the ground along with her. Gasp! Somebody Izuku knew was watching him. So he looked towards the person. It was Toru, and she had tears in her eyes. "Wait, Toru." But it was too late. She was already in her dragon form and was flying off before he could say anything else. Lucy quickly got off of him, and he stood up and watched her fly off. He tensed his fists at his sides as his skin transformed into scales, and he started to become more dragon-like. God damn it! His hands turned into claws, and his jaw started to become longer, like a dragon's snout. "Izuku, calm down," Lucy shouted. She sounded reasonable, but not enough for him. "Shut up." He turned around and yelled at her. He wasn't even a human anymore. He was more of a dragon than anything. "You won't ever be able to go back to normal, Izuku, so calm down, you idiot." She screamed at him. He looked surprised, but he started to become his normal self. His hands turned to that of a human's, and his skin became peachy and normal. He sat on the ground and held his head in his hands. "What have I done?" "I didn't want her to be mad, 𝗧𝗏." Izuku was looking past the water and saw her flying into the distance. Lucy approached him from behind, wanting to apologize for what happened, but couldn't think of anything to say. "I gotta go find her." He stood up and walked past Lucy, ignoring her because she couldn't help in this situation. Only another dragon could, and he knew the perfect one to go to. "𝗂𝗵𝗃 𝗂𝗵𝗃," Izuku shouted as he burst through the front door. She looked at him with a questioning gaze from where she sat. "You're home, Izuku-san," she said happily as she raced towards him and jumped for a hug. "Yeah, I am. Can I ask you something? You can fly, right?" he asked as he hugged her. "In my dragon form I can." "What? Great. Then can you help me track down Toru?" He set her down on the ground and walked outside with her. "What happened to her?" she asked nonchalantly. Izuku stayed silent for a few moments. "She was mistaken for something I was doing with a close friend of my father's." He started to walk back to the beach, bringing 𝗂𝗵𝗃 along, when he found Lucy yet again. He walked past her, pulling 𝗂𝗵𝗃 along lightly. When she started to walk next to him, she was only slightly shorter than him. He's 5 feet 6 inches. "Look, Izuku, I'm sorry for what happened. If you want, you can blame me," Lucy said quietly. Izuku stared straight ahead as he responded, "No. It wasn't even your fault. If anything, I caused this to happen and I have to fix it. So if you don't mind, could you leave me and my daughter to do this alone?" His voice was emotionless. "All right then, I'll take my leave." "Goodbye, Izuku." She sounded distant, but so was Izuku until he spoke. "Also, thanks for snapping me out of it back there. I don't know what would have happened. After this is all done, would you mind if I learned about this magic?" His gaze never faltered as he got ever closer to the beach. "Sure. I should be in Japan for a while anyways. You can probably find me around this area a lot, since work never ends. Anyways, I'll see you and your girlfriend later." The 20-ish-year-old woman then ran off in the opposite direction, laughing like a child. The tips of Izuku's ears became a bright red as he looked down at the ground for once. "Is that way Toru is staying in this dimension with you?" 𝗂𝗵𝗃 asked. And no, we aren't even close enough to be dating." He stammered out. His face grew redder as he went from start to finish. The dragon 𝗨𝗨 looked up at him and snickered. "Ravioli, ravioli, don't lewd the dragon 𝗨𝗨." "Hey," he said defensively, causing her to giggle. But never mind that, they were at the beach where Toru had flown from. "Sniff, sniff, I can smell a trail of her scent." She turned into a cutesy white and a light purple dragon. Hop on, her voice was loud and more hoarse, kinda like a dragon's, so, following her orders, Izuku hopped onto the young dragon's back. Off, her legs were off the ground before Izuku could even situate himself. We do. She took off, and so did Izuku, but he tumbled down her body and grabbed onto her tail before he fell off. He swung in the air as her tail moved, and partially because of the massive amounts of wind that was being pushed onto his body from the speed they traveled at. Wah! Izuku screamed into the wind, "Please save me, someone." It was rather painful to have his arm nearly be severed due to how powerful everything was compared to him. My bad. 𝗂𝗏's tail folded upwards and onto her back. Izuku grabbed onto her back and was safe. "Thanks for that, 𝗂𝗏," he said sarcastically. His hair was pushed all the way back and his arms were comprised of scales, so that he wouldn't suffer irreparable damage from holding onto her tail. "We're getting closer, Izuku," she said as they flew through some white fluffy clouds. On the other side of them was something truly magnificent. A green grassy field that seemed like it had never been touched by humans. It was a sight to behold, and in the midst of it was the familiar green dragon that was Toru. "Set me down here." She listened to his orders and started to fly towards the ground, which was behind their friend. Izuku got off of her back when she landed, and she transformed back to her normal form. "Stay here, 𝗂𝗏. You don't need to worry about anything that happens though," he said, trying to reassure her. She nodded, then sat down on the fluffy green grass and then stared at Izuku as he walked towards Toru. She had noticed the dragon that landed near her and had her eyes on the human that walked near her. "𝗬𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗍𝗍𝑦𝑜𝑢𝑤𝑎𝑛𝑡, she asked rudely in her dragon form. "Can you please turn into your human form, Toru, so I can do something?" She scoffed and a bright flash of light came from her. She was wearing the maid uniform, but it was kinda singed and torn in some areas. Izuku walked closer to her without saying a single word, was standing in front of her when she was suddenly hugged. "I'm sorry, Toru, but that never even happened." They did fly through fluffy clouds, but as soon as they came out the other side, a red spell circle was in front of them. Fire had started to come out of the spell circle and 𝗂𝗏 dodged it by flying downwards. "Holy!" Izuku shouted as he fell through the air, since he did fall off of her as she flew at fast speeds to the ground. He instinctively went into his Dragon Force form and breathed fire at the ground in order to lessen the impact. He finally touched solid ground and looked up to where the spell circle was. He thought it was Toru that was shooting them out of the sky because of how upset she was, but the dragon was pitch black like the midnight sky of a starless night. Izuku saw something that stood out like a sore thumb that was on the dragon. It was something black with orange, fire-like hair. It was Toru. 𝗂𝗏 flew around dodging every attack that the mysterious dragon led at her. When Izuku started to become less and less human, he was really angry, even angrier than before. The black dragon took its focus off of 𝗂𝗏 and tilted its head towards Izuku. A small amount of electricity came out of its mouth and it started to fly towards him. The area around Izuku started to slowly heat up and the enemy was 10 seconds away from getting to him. Izuku's skin had mostly turned to scales, but the area around his eyes was blackened out and the enemy was 5 seconds away from impact. For seconds. 3 seconds, fire began to dance wildly on his fists and calves. 2 seconds, give me back. 1 second, my dragon Maid. He jumped into the sky and drove his fist into the dragon's face, causing it to fall to the ground. Izuku landed on the ground again and this time was in front of Toru. Was still attached to the dragon, but Izuku didn't care. He ran to her and took off the restraints that were binding her. She was safe in his arms as he brought her to 𝗂𝗏. During the whole thing, the dragon was recovering from the strong blow Izuku dealt to it. "Get out of here now, 𝗂𝗏." Izuku told her. She had landed on the ground and was in her human form. Before she left, he put the injured maid onto the dragon's back. Toru's had cuts lacing her body. The worst one was the one on her cheek. He lowered his head and gave her an embrace on her forehead. "I'll be seeing you guys later, now go," he shouted. An immense amount of wind appeared when she took off. He noticed that the black dragon was gone and standing in its place was a man in a black suit. Though his appearance was similar to a man's, his characteristics were more like a dragon's. Blood was leaking out from his forehead, which was where Izuku had punched him when he was a dragon. "That hurts." "You did good, kid." he suddenly reappeared next to Izuku with his fist enveloped in lightning. But not good enough. Izuku was punched in the stomach and was sent flying with a look of pain on his face. Luckily the wound wasn't bad, but that was because scales had grown suddenly right before the point of impact. Izuku was about a mile away from where he was punched and he was on the ground, in a lot of pain. "Why is lightning so painful?" he commented as he got up, trying to brush the pain off and be ready for a strong battle. As he looked forward he could see the man run at him, but he could hardly follow because of how fast he was. "So you could withstand my first blow, how interesting," he said into Izuku's ear. He was about to punch him, but the man had already run off. "F this." Izuku began to take a deep breath. Roar of the fire dragon. Fire shot out of his mouth and he began to spin, so that the fire would trap him in a circle and hopefully confine the man to Izuku's playing area. The fire spread across the appealing green field, burning it in an instant. But Izuku's plan had worked. The man couldn't move as freely as before because he stopped right before the barrier of flames. The barrier wasn't too big, but it also wasn't too small, enough for both of them to move around and fight. "You can think on your feet, oh ho, that just can't do." He was in front of Izuku yet again, but he was ready this time. He grabbed the man's fist that was heading for his face and was shocked by the electricity. "Talon of the fire dragon." Izuku roared as he sent back a counterattack. His fist collided with the man's arm, breaking it at the elbow. He backed away as he cried out on pain. "That hurts like hell." Izuku walked towards him with his fist blazing and punched the man. "You may think I'm done for. But I'm not." He was holding Izuku's fist and eating the flames that were dancing on his fist. He witnessed the broken arm go back to normal. "You may think that it's impossible for a dragon to MSTR more than one thing, but you'd be wrong," he said sinisterly. His fist was covered in electrical fire and he punched Izuku in the face, bringing him down to the ground. He should have been out cold and he is rather close to it, but he wasn't backing down, not until he could live safely with his new family. Still holding on. "But don't give." He had his foot on Izuku's the entire time, pushing down harder with every word. Izuku grabbed the man's ankle and threw him off. Blood dripped from his nose and forehead and spilled into one of his open eyes. He closed it and looked to the man with a darkened gaze. "I'll never give up. Not until I die." His voice was cold and harsh. He could never give up, he could never surrender, and he could never leave his family to be captured and killed, or whatever would have happened to them. "Fine." He walked towards him until he was in front of Izuku. They both stood, one more injured than the other. "Then die," the dragon man said simply. A spear of lightning came out of his hand and he struck Izuku in the face, or so he thought. Izuku had stopped the spear with his hand. It was in less than a centimeter in front of his face because hands weren't invincible. "I wonder." Izuku opened his mouth and bit down on the spearhead. The lighting wasn't good tasting, but he still ate it. He then upped the rest of the spear and began to feel rejuvenated. After eating all of it, he started to have a coughing fit. Blag, that was nasty to eat. The wound on his forehead had started to close, but it was needed. He took in another deep breath. Roar of the fire lightning dragon. A cyclone of fire shot out of his mouth, encircled by twirling lightning that was pointed at the man, who was then surrounded on all sides by the two elements. Once they subsided, his outfit was scorched, but he was still standing, so Izuku ran at him with fire in the palms of his hands. Wind strike and fist of the. He blew the fire, sending embers at the dragon man. The air that was surrounding him had small glittering particles floating around in it. Fire dragon. Izuku's fist was sent into the man's stomach and fire burst out from it, igniting every single ember that surrounded them, causing an explosion of fire to appear and cause a cataclysm of it to surround them. The fire fades and there stood Izuku, who was over the supposedly dead body of the enemy, but once he got a better look he could tell he was breathing faintly. "Thank F he's not dead." He let out a sigh and fell to his knees. His eyes slowly became heavier. He was going to pass out, and he did, but the last thing he saw was a white fluffy cloud moving towards him at a fast rate. I felt something damp covering my forehead, so I slowly opened my eyes in order to look at my surroundings. The only thing I could see was Toru sitting in a chair next to me. "Ooh," I said, my voice rasping with every syllable. "Izuku." She got up from the chair and hugged me by my ear. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me caused this thing to happen. I am sorry for what happened, Toru, I said quietly. I don't think she heard what I said because she asked me what it was. I said I'm sorry for what happened to you, it was my fault that this even happened. I said that I was sorry for what happened to you, it was my fault that you were even captured. Toru was shocked. Did he truly feel like he failed her? Izuku. It wasn't your fault. I chose to fly off. I chose to let my emotions get the best of me. I chose to get captured because of it. But I didn't choose to be saved. You chose to save me. Her grasp around Izuku's neck tightened and buried her neck into him. And I really appreciate that. Toru's voice wavered, as if she was about to cry. The past, why did she feel this way? Why did she feel all odd when around him? She didn't really know. All she knew was that she felt abandoned by Izuku when he was with that girl on the beach. She thought they had something nobody else could, but was proved wrong when she flew off and was proved wrong again when she learned what Izuku did to save her. They were both injured when 𝗂𝗃 brought them home, though Izuku was in a worse state than Toru, since he was still out cold. 𝗂𝗃 had landed on the roof of their home, prompting Toru to slide off 𝗂𝗃's back while holding Izuku. With the help of the small dragon girl, Toru had treated his wounds after laying him out on his bed. She sat in a chair that was next to his bed holding 𝗂𝗃 in her lap, all the while praying to the same gods that tried to kill her to watch over him and keep him safe. Hey Toru, is Izuku going to be okay? The little girl asked meekly. Of course 𝗂𝗃, you know he never gives up. Toru believed her own words, but of course she didn't know when they'd come true, nor did she know that he would truly wake up at all. She wished with all her heart that he wouldn't be in this condition for the rest of his life, because Toru had feelings for the boy laying in front of her. And she would love him, even if she was hated by the same man. She knew that her love would never waver for him. A single tear fell out of Toru's eyes and rolled down her cheek until it fell onto 𝗂𝗃's head. You know Toru, he really loves you. 𝗂𝗃 continued to speak after Toru's little outburst. Otherwise, he wouldn't have fought so bravely to protect you. 𝗂𝗃, you can't say things like that. He also protected you. He would have done that for anyone because he treats us like his friends and family, nothing more, nothing less. It pained her to say that. Nah. He really loves you. 𝗂𝗃, stop. Stop saying things like that, Toru had said in a motherly way. Or at least she thought, because she sounded more like a child than anything. Toru made food for 𝗂𝗃, put her to bed, and went back to watching Izuku as he slept. He was peaceful, though his breathing was slightly erratic and the air in the room felt electrical. She had fallen asleep sometime during the night and woke up when she heard the door to 𝗂𝗃's room open and close. I must have dozed off. She stood up and walked out of the room to see 𝗂𝗃 before she left. She made her lunch for school and saw her leave the house. She then went back to watch over Izuku. This continued day after day, night after night, until he woke up when 𝗂𝗃 was at school. Back to the present, Izuku moved her off of him. He could see that Toru's eyes were watering and tears were coming out. He reached out for her face and gently wiped the tears away. Hey Toru, can I ask you for something? Her waited a few moments to muster up the courage. This? He leaned into her face despite the pain in her. Her eyes opened in surprise and her arms slightly flailed about because she was about to fall. He truly loved her, for the embrace was passionate. Izuku put an arm around her waist to prevent her from falling, which caused Toru to close her eyes and melt into the embrace. Both of them were really happy. Izuku's love for Toru had manifested over a short period of time, while she was infatuated with him from the start. But that didn't matter, they were finally together. After almost a minute of Izuku broke away for a breath. I love you Toru. He waited for her response because she was still calming down from the embrace. I love you too Izuku, and again, they kissed her, at least tried to. The pain that was in Izuku's side felt like he was being stabbed by a sword, one that had electricity coursing through it. He grabbed his side in pain and laid back down. Sorry? He grunted as he rolled up his shirt. A small bruise was the source of pain, but it was also shooting out a small amount of electricity. Gasp. Izuku, did you try to eat lightning? Toru asked. Izuku was prodding the wound, getting zapped every time he touched it. Yeah, I was losing against that dragon, so I thought it would be a good idea to eat his lightning spear. I only won because I turned the tables with a roar of fire and lightning. Is it bad? I don't know. I know that dragons can handle more than one element in their bodies, but I don't know about a human. Despite that you are a dragon slayer, Izuku took in the information. Well, what if I mumble? Toru was surprised. She hadn't seen him mumble like this at all. Izuku. He snapped out of his mumble trance. Yes? What did you just say? Izuku realized that he had another one of his mumbling sessions. It would be too much to explain to her. Could you help me up to the roof? With Toru helping him walk up the stairs to the roof by acting like a crutch, they made it there quickly. Okay, you should step back. He walked towards the end of the roof and took a peculiar stance. He took a deep breath. Roar of the fire lightning dragon. A small tornado of fire and lightning came out of his mouth, piercing the cloudy heavens. He kept going until there wasn't an absurd amount of pain in his side anymore. Phew. That feels good. He looked back. At Toru, she was shocked at the crazy amount of lightning he let out of his body. Actually, it seemed like his body was replicating the electricity, because Izuku thought he shot out all of it during the fight. That sort of explains why his wound was crawling with electricity. Anyways, he fell onto his knee and was on the verge of collapsing from exhaustion. Please take me back inside. He felt bad to ask so much of her, but it seemed that she didn't mind at all as she brought him back to his room. The two of them laid next to each other, just cuddling, up until Toru fell asleep. She was beyond exhausted. This was due to her sleeping patterns for the past couple of days, which was a small amount of sleep and a large amount of being awake, which would kill any human, but she was a dragon so she didn't need as much sleep. Izuku didn't really know about that though. He watched Toru sleep. She was even cuter when she slept than when she was awake, but it wasn't a large gap. He always noticed how pretty she was and always tried to get it off of his mind, so that he wouldn't fall hopelessly in love with her. But it didn't work, for it wasn't just her looks he fell in love with, it was mainly her amazing personality. She was loyal, funny, caring, she was everything positive and nothing negative, at least that's what Izuku thought. And he would have listed off more, if he didn't hear the front door open. He looked at Toru one more time and moved out of the bed. He wanted to let her rest because he's been doing enough of that for the past few days. He opened the door and saw 𝗂𝗄 taking off her shoes. She looked at him and her eyes lit up with joy. Izuku. She didn't even finish taking her shoes off, because she ran straight for him, tackling him with a hug. Hey 𝗂𝗄. He then rubbed her head, giving her the proper head pats any little girl who wants them needs. So how was school? Izuku asked casually, as if he wasn't in a small coma for days. It was good. But you're finally awake, so I don't care about school at all. Fair enough. He picked her up and hugged her in his own arms as he walked over to the couch. She held on by his neck the entire time. She was cute mainly because she treated Izuku like her own father, even though he wasn't. Which made him wonder why isn't she with her own parents after making dinner for 𝗂𝗄. She was put to bed. Izuku tucked her in and gave her an embrace on the cheek. Good night 𝗂𝗄-chan. He turned on the small nightlight that was near her bed and walked towards the door. He was about to close it all the way, but 𝗂𝗄 said something. I'm glad you're all right. Good night Izuku-san. Izuku smiled inwardly as he shut the door softly. He felt complete for some reason. Was it because of his small family? Or something else? Anyway, he heard the door to his room open. Toru has finally been awakened. Do you want something to eat, Toru? Izuku asked as he walked over to the fridge. His gait was weird and was somewhat messed up, but he still walked as normal as he could. It was amazing at how fast he could recover when he ate fire. Although he could eat any flame, he chooses to stay away from the stovetops one, and that's because it tastes unnatural, despite being made of a natural gas. Sure, Izuku opened the fridge and pulled out an already made omelette covering some blackened rice. He pulled out some ketchup with it, and placed the food down in front of her. Thank you Izuku. It seemed like she hadn't eaten in days, because of how much she eyed the food as it was being brought to her. Izuku took in a deep breath as his hand shook in his lap. So, about earlier. What does that make us? His legs bounced as he waited for Toru to answer. It might be obvious to the audience what the answer is, but definitely not to Izuku. He was as oblivious as they come. It makes us a couple. She stretched over the table and landed an embrace on Izuku's cheek. Oh, Izuku's heart burst forth with happiness. Amazing, he said quietly as Toru finished off the rest of the meal. He knew that she wasn't saying that to be superficial, she had truly liked him. Whether it was for his personality, looks, or something else, he didn't care because that would come up at a later time. And right now he was still exhausted from how inactive he's been for the past couple of days. It would take at least a day for him to be at 100% again. But that's not what would happen. Hey Toru, why do you know Dragon Slayer magic? Izuku asked. Was he truly oblivious as to what it was? I don't, but I believe that Dragon Slayer magic is just a weaker version of actual dragon magic. I don't really know, but why do you ask? Toru had a puzzled look plastered on her face. Then why was I beginning to turn into a dragon or demon, or whatever the hell that was earlier? No reason, just wanted to know more about your magic. He took a sip of his water as he tilted back in his chair, and he swore he caught a glimpse of something behind her head which caused him to fall all the way to the ground. Were those? Are you okay, Izuku? Toru worried over him, because he wasn't fully healed, but enough to be doing his shenanigans with Kanna. He sat up from hitting the ground. I'm fine. He brushed her off as he stood and walked over to the counter that was next to her. There was a single letter there. They were the symbol of 𝗬𝗓𝗍. He grabbed the letter, which was surprisingly weighted, and held it over his head. Izuku ran back to the table with a letter in hand. It had a seal that was similar to a cross that wasn't centered whatsoever. He took a deep breath as he looked Toru in her eyes. He then quickly tore it open. A small black disc dropped out as he turned it upside down. There was also a letter. But he didn't get a chance to read it, because the disc started up with a flash, frightening and effectively blinding him. He looked at the colored hologram. There he stood, All Might, Izuku's favorite hero of all time. Wow, it's All Might. He's so cool up close. Izuku stared into the colored hologram of All Might as he talked to someone off of the screen. Izuku Midoriya, it's a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it was in person. I am here to congratulate you. You did the overall best during your entrance exams, passing both the written and practical with ease. You accumulated 105 points from all the robots you destroyed. Your attacks just cut through them as if they were butter. But that really isn't all. You scored an extra 60 from destroying the zero-pointer and effectively protecting your comrades on the battlefield. Add up both sets of points, and you have 165, which places you as the highest-ranking person who took the exam. Izuku's eyes widened as All Might said his next few words. Welcome, Izuku, to your hero academia. He outstretched his hand as if Izuku could grab onto it when the video feed cut out. I passed, Toru. Izuku's voice was quiet yet excited at the same time, making him sound like he was whisper screaming. He picked Toru up by the waist, who was now next to him, and deeply her on the lips. Her face turned completely red as she was enveloped in his passionate embrace. Her arms extended and wrapped around Izuku's neck. She melted into the embrace and took it on as her own. The two were practically inseparable. There wasn't a single distinction between the two. For they acted like they were two halves of the same person that was now finally whole. They stayed like that for a minute or so until Izuku broke away for a breath, instantly going back for more. He may have been exhausted and hurting from his wounds, but that didn't stop him from bringing her to his room and placing her on his bed. He took off his shirt and got into the bed next to her. She had somehow shifted into something more lewd when he had his back turned. So, what do you want to do to me, Izuku? She asked seductively. Blood dripped from his nose as he glimpsed her miraculous body. And nothing, only love and cherish you, which was partially true. He had wanted to go further beyond than just that. But he had to cockblock himself since they just started to date. A disappointed look washed over her face for a split second, but her cheery self reared its head once again. Toru slept next to Izuku all night. The two cuddled all throughout the night after she had changed out of her 𝗧𝗚𝗏 lingerie. Izuku decided that he would call his mother and tell her about the news in the morning, while Toru also decided that she'd introduce him to some of her friends. Izuku and Toru fell asleep holding each other, which was odd for a new couple, but they had known each other for so long, so it was normal. Izuku was the first to wake up, which was at the crack of dawn when a ray of light hit one of his eyes. His breathing was off. It was as if he was breathing out of one of his nostrils. His eyes wandered downwards and rest upon her melons, which were pushing against his face. He away with a growing blush on his face. His ears became so red they looked like they were going to steam. He also noticed something else. She had worn one of his shirts to bed. It was far too large on her, and only added to how naturally cute she was. He felt a warm liquid trickle from his face, so he wiped it and found that it was bleeding, probably because of his predicament. After he got dressed into today's clothing, Izuku grabbed his phone from his nightstand and walked into the living room with it. He sat down and looked at the phone in his hand. Would she even be awake right now? Or better yet, would she forgive me for what I did? He opened his phone and held his thumb over her contact. He took a deep breath and sighed as he clicked on it. It rang several times before she picked up. "Hey Mom," was all he said before he heard her voice, one that he hadn't heard in a while. "Izuku, why'd you call me so early?" She still drank, because Izuku could tell that she was suffering from a hangover due to her voice. "Sorry, I just wanted to tell you that." He took a deep breath. He had gone against his own mother's words. "I was accepted into 𝗧𝗼𝗂," he blurted out. It took a few moments before she spoke again. You got accepted? I knew you would try, but I never expected you to get into that blasted school." She wasn't really happy that Izuku was accepted into a school that helped people with quirks to become heroes. She would have been fine with the idea if her husband hadn't passed because of it. "You will not go to that school. Even if I have to come over there myself and snap you out of it." Words that Izuku never expected to come out of his mouth did. "I won't quit. Not on my one and only dream, the one I've had since I was a child." This was the first time he had ever disobeyed his mother and raised her voice at her. Izuku could tell that she was in shock, because her voice was dead silent. 𝗳𝗲𝗄𝗧𝗏. She didn't even let him apologize before she hung up the phone. She was really. Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose. "What is wrong with me? She's probably going to book a flight from America to Japan, just to stop me." This isn't how he wanted to see his mother after a year of her being away overseas. She only worked so that she could take care of him, but that caused their mother and son type relationship to slowly drift apart. Each breath that he took became increasingly shallower and much faster. He was going to start having a panic attack because of what he said to his mother, the only parent he had left to love. He silently rubbed the palms of his hands into his head of hair. This was the only way he knew how to calm himself down. This was because it usually numbed his mind, sending it into a sort of autopilot state, where he didn't have to really care about anything. Why did this? He didn't know. Maybe it was something that his father had done, but he somehow repressed every memory associated with it. Izuku stopped calming himself down when he noticed his breath had gone back to normal. An hour had passed before he tried to call his mother again and tried to apologize, but her phone went straight to voicemail. What is she going to do? He tried to think of anything but noticed that Toru had come out of his room. "Morning, Toru," she replied back with a yawn and a wave. He walked up to her and gave her an embrace on the cheek. He didn't take notice in the outfit she wore. It was still the shirt she wore to bed. "Hey Toru, where's your uniform?" His head was tilted downwards and his finger was on his chin. He was thinking intently about what would happen if his mother actually came here. She looked down and her face reddened. "Oh right. I forgot about that, hee." Her clothing became bright and before Izuku could say anything else, she was in her over-glorified maid uniform, which at this point was more like cosplay than anything. "Do you want breakfast, Izuku?" she said from across the counter. She was in the kitchen resting her elbows upon it. "I'm not really hungry, but how would you feel if my mother suddenly came over today?" "She's coming over?" she asked excitedly. Her dragon tail actually started to wag, as if she were a dog. "No," she gave him a disappointed look. "Maybe. I don't really know. All I know is that I did something that she doesn't like at all." "What?" she asked simply. "Have you ever wondered why I don't try to bring up my father in any sort of conversations? Well, it's because Hitano Kobayashi Midoriya died by trying to save his fellow heroes in a major battle. He laid his life down for theirs, which caused me and my mom to grieve over his death. It also caused her to not let me become a hero. She doesn't want me to live a short life like him, because she loved me as much as him." Izuku didn't really mind speaking to Toru about his past. He just thinks it's painful every time he mentions something from it. "It's just stressful because both her and I know that becoming a hero is my dream, especially after finding out my father was." I was conflicted on whether I should actually try to get into the school after you helped me use magic. Sai, what should I do, Toru? His eyes pleaded with hers for any guidance or advice. Izuku, if she comes over here, then tell her how you really feel about being a hero, and prove to her that you can be a good one as well. Prove to her that you are strong enough to take care of yourself, because your father didn't die because he was weak. It sounded like he was a hero that would give his life in order to save many. She walked behind him and rubbed circles into his back. Tears were flowing from his eyes. This whole situation was overwhelming him. It was around 7 p.m. that night when the doorbell to Izuku's home rang. He got up from where he laid with Kanna and Toru on each side of his body. He took a deep breath before he answered the door. He was met face to face with his mother, who seemed exhausted for some reason. "Hi, Mom," he said sheepishly as he waved. "Hello, Izuku. Could you please explain why you even applied to UA in the first place?" A bead of sweat rolled down his face. He knew he was going to be in for his first major argument with her. His mother walked through the door. She obviously didn't know that there was anyone else inside, because she started to scold Izuku, her son, as soon as she stepped inside. But he interrupted. "Hey, Toru, could you please take Kanna with you to somewhere?" "I don't know," I said, completely ignoring my mother as she became quiet. "Sure, Izuku." She walked into Kanna's room and came out with her still sleeping a few moments later. Toru walked over to the terrace door with 2 sets of eyes on her. She promptly opened it, and then jumped off into the night, turning into her dragon form and flying back up into the sky. The building shook when she landed on top of it. "Who was that?" my mother asked. "My girlfriend," Izuku said meekly, hoping to defuse the situation. "Good for you. But that doesn't matter. Why would you go behind your mother's back and try out for you? Hell, you passed. You know what happened to your father because of that school." "I know, for God's sakes, you can't even hurt a fly, much less a villain." "I know." His fist tensed at his side. "You don't even have a quirk. You can't even use magic." She held out a light blue orb of magic in her hands. "I know. But Mom, I didn't try out because I thought I could pass. I tried out." His skin transformed into black and green scales. Fire came out of his mouth with each exhale, and wings of fire appeared, burning the clothing on his back. "Because I knew I could pass. I know it's dangerous, but I won't let what happened to Dad happen to me." Her eyes glimmered with tears in the partially lit corridor. "Not now, not ever." She was speechless. She didn't know what to say about the son that stood in front of her, especially when his clothes were engulfed in flame. "You gonna get that?" She pointed towards his fiery shirt that still clung to his body. "It?" He knew he couldn't eat his own flames, but his mother used her magic on it, instantly extinguishing it. "Thanks, but you have to believe in me, Mom." She looked him dead in his blackened eyes. "Sure, but prove it to me." He was confused. "Prove what to you?" "That you can win against a hero." Sweat started to bead on Izuku's forehead. "How about I fight Toru? I'd rather not hurt 𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗏. You will fight me. Then I'll decide if you can be a hero." Izuku sighed. There would be no convincing her otherwise. His mother, Kaori, was a hero before she thought about settling down and having a child. Her husband did not, and he paid dearly for it when she was in her prime. She used her magic like it was an extension of her own body, treating it not as an invincible force that could never stop her, but treated it as if it was a gift that she should never overuse, like the gift of life. Regardless, she was prepared to defeat her son with all the strength she could muster. No one in her lifetime would make the same mistake as her husband did. No one would live a premature life on her watch. Izuku had flown the both of them to the top of a small mountain, where it was believed a spring of magic had dwelled. But with most types of magic within this world, it dwindled and eventually disappeared, though the Kobayashi Midoriya family always made a trek up to it at least once a year. Kaori hadn't climbed it in a few years, because she's been out of the country so she could properly take care of Izuku despite being gone for a portion of his life. Izuku had finally gotten to the top of the medium-sized mountain and landed. His scales went away and so did his fiery wings. Toru had given him a shirt before he left that was somewhat fireproof. That was because it was from her own world. Why she brought it? Izuku didn't know. He was just thankful that he had some clothing to wear when he flew through the air. "Alright, I'm ready to fight, Mom." Izuku hated the idea of hurting his family, but didn't know that she was a hero before he was born, so he was in for a treat. A moonlit lake was next to them, the light from it causing the water to glimmer without end. "All right, Izuku." A sudden blast of magic came from her, causing Izuku to get pushed backwards. "Prepare to lose." She was in the sky and ready to slam down a large fist of blue magic upon him. Izuku dodged, but didn't counter her move, so she took the opportunity to swing a new blade of her magic at him. Izuku held up his scaled arms to block it. The initial hit didn't hurt at all, but when the blade started to turn and act like a chainsaw, it hurt. Specks of scales and BLD shot from his arms. Quickly Izuku kicked the blade away and jumped backwards. Holy dashed, he was punched in the back, which took his breath away by his mother, who had suddenly appeared. "Izuku." Language. She forced all of her power and pushed him back into the ground, making a small Izuku-sized crater next to the moonlit lake. He slowly got up from the hole, completely dazed from the impact. He looked at his mother that was over his head. "You lose, Izuku," she shouted as she brought down a magic hammer onto Izuku's head. She thought he was hit square in the head. She thought she had won. But she had thought wrong. Izuku had grabbed the hammer with a dragon's hand, preventing it from hitting him. Suddenly lightning discharged around him, even being sent through the incorporeal hammer that could only be gripped by those with the same magic. "What the hell?" She didn't get to finish her sentence. The lightning had appeared and disappeared in moments, electrocuting her easily. But she wouldn't go down without a fight. Kaori swung her legs downwards, breaking free from her own shocking grasp. She turned towards her son and threw small magic kukri at him. It hit his scales but didn't penetrate them. He seemed unfazed by that, and it confused her until she saw the look in his eyes, a look so inhumane and dark, it sent a chill down her spine. A look of something. Something that couldn't be explained by humanity. He took a step towards her, so she tried to step back, but found she was unable to move. She looked briefly downwards. Her magic had embedded itself in the ground and wrapped around her ankle, anchoring her to where she stood. A magic sword came out of nowhere and stabbed at the magical roots. They were sliced apart, but instantly grew back, spreading even further upwards. She hacked and slashed at the growing roots to no avail. They had spread to her arms and pinned her to the ground. Out of the corner of her eyes, she saw Izuku slowly step towards her, his gaze darkening as he got closer. He stopped a few feet in front of her. Kaori's heart in her ears, completely silencing anything that was going on around her. She couldn't even hear her own voice pleading to stay alive. She closed her eyes when she felt Izuku's breath on her. "Mom, open your eyes." He shouted at her. She suddenly didn't feel anything binding her to the ground. She opened her eyes to see Izuku, the real Izuku, crouching over to see if she was all right. "Mom, what happened?" Izuku asked as his mother sat up and held her head in pain. "I don't know." Izuku looked at her suspiciously. "Really? Because you just collapsed to the floor after you threw those small daggers at me." "Wait, I just fell to the ground. Let's just forget this happened. I guess you won the battle, Izuku." "Maybe. Just maybe it's what I think it is." I don't feel like I WF." Kaori had jabbed her fingers into his left pec, sending a wave of magic through him. Izuku was knocked out cold, but blue mist had appeared around him. Her magic was coming from Izuku, as if he was using it. "Thought so. It seems this is your magic," Kaori thought as she jabbed her fingers into his pec again, reversing her own effects on him. He seems to be unconsciously using my power, though. How does it work, and why did he become hellish? Still, you would have easily beaten me, son. I guess." She gritted her teeth and spoke through tensed lips. "You can be a hero." His face became brighter, but diminished when he stared at something in his hand. Kaori looked down to see that a small snowflake rested upon it, but it was completely blackened. He looked up into the sky. Thousands of black snowflakes were falling down. But what was in the center of it all, fairly high into the sky above the moonlit lake, was a black dragon, one with the same hue emanating off its scales. It wasn't actually flying in the sky. It seemed to be a vision of some sort. "Is these a dragon? I thought they didn't exist, at least not in our world," it roared, interrupting Kaori's thoughts. An ear-splitting demonic roar came from it, causing her to hold her ears closed. Izuku stared at it, his wings began to extend from his back, becoming even more fiery and twisted. He was prepared for a fight, especially if the dragon was real. Once the roar subsided, so did the vision of the dragon. Kaori opened her ears once again. What was that? Izuku asked. He dared not lower his guard nor his wings. Then you saw the dragon too. Izuku, I believe you have my magic along with your Dragon Slayer magic, she said, completely derailing the topic at hand. Sure, but the beast. Why did it appear as only a vision? Izuku asked as his fist tensed. It seemed that creature had scared the tea out of him, even if it showed a small amount. After spending 3 days in Japan with her son, Kaori Kobayashi had to return to her job in America. Meanwhile, Izuku had nightmares of the dragon every night since he first saw it. What could it possibly mean? Was he seeing things WTH his mother's magic? Or did he make it his own, like he did with the lightning powers of that emissary from Toru's world? The only thing he truly knows is that they had witnessed an omen, one that could cause a calamity within their world, and so, Izuku decided that he'd train until that day would come, and he'd do that with the people he'd meet at UA. Becoming stronger alongside his new friends, Izuku had his uniform. Today was the first day that his mother had been gone, and the first day at his high school. He was ready for his hero academia. There would be no stopping him, nothing could stand in his way except his best friend, Kaken, who Izuku immediately ran into when he exited his home. Izuku fell on his butt and looked up at his friend. He looked, sorry Kaken. He then scratched the back of his head nervously. Get up 𝗧𝗵𝗲. He barked at Izuku as he held out his hand for him to grab. Izuku's smile brightened and he grabbed his friend's hand to be pulled upwards. Thanks Kaken. You ready to live out our dreams today? Izuku casually asked as they walked to school. He was a short distance from his friend when he said this. Course. If I'm going to be the number one, then I have to be better than 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Izuku snorted at his remark. Kaken, you know you won't be number one. Then who will? Izuku nodded, causing Kaken to let out a short chuckle. At least try to surpass me before even setting your sights on number one. Izuku rolled his eyes. Sure Kaken, whatever you want to believe. He had gone so far, so fast with his ability to transform into a dragon. It wasn't completely perfect because he was still mostly human when he did it. And he still was when he had picked up Kaken and flew at breakneck speeds towards UA. What the fuck? Katsuki screamed into the wind, though his voice was silenced because of the pressure from flying. Don't worry Kaken, just taking a quicker way to school, Izuku explained as he continued to fly. Set me the hell down. He started to flail around, nearly causing Izuku to fall. Knock it off. We will fall if you don't calm down. He was fairly close to UA, and wasn't ready to stop anytime soon. So he continued on, regardless of his friend's freakout. I said TOF stop. Kaken had broken free of his grasp and directed his hand to Izuku's, using an explosion on him. Izuku's scales instinctively blocked his attack, but he had to go faster if he didn't want to be attacked by Katsuki again. In a few more seconds, Izuku and Kaken had gotten to UA. One of them was clearly off by it. It was Izuku, because his friend had used his quirk on him which severely damaged his scales. Jesus Christ Kaken, would it hurt you to not use your quirk on me for once? Izuku yelled. He already regretted it before it even came out of his mouth. Whatever Deku, meet you inside, he sounded disappointed. It truly seemed like he wanted to mend his friendship and atone for his past sins he committed unto Izuku. At the rate they were going at, then it would be almost impossible for Bakugo. After Izuku watched Katsuki walk into the main building, completely ashamed of his actions, he followed. He had entered his classroom a full 2 minutes after Katsuki did, mainly because he was nervous, but was also fairly excited to meet his classmates. Inhale, exhale, you got this Izuku. He brought his fist up and clenched his fist tight. He was ready for a whole new beginning. He slid the door to the classroom, but was immediately pushed backwards by what seemed like the wind. He hit the wall opposite of the door and slid downwards. I'm so sorry, here let me help you up. A feminine voice said, though Izuku couldn't see her because his vision was blurry. He felt an arm grab onto his and pull him up. He would have fallen forward, but it felt as if something was holding him up. He shook his head and his sight slowly returned. He noticed a girl with purple hair was the one responsible for him not falling. "Thanks," he said calmly, still somewhat disoriented. "I'm so sorry for what I did." The girl then bowed repeatedly with haste. "There's no need to be," Izuku said as she continuously bowed, getting faster with each one. "So sorry." "Ahem, nice to meet you, my name is Tomoko." She held out her hand towards Izuku. He graciously accepted it. "My name is Izuku. It's great to meet you, Tomoko." A small bead of sweat dripped down Izuku's face. This Tomoko girl was profusely bowing and seemingly defying the laws of the human body. Somehow her body sped up until it looked like she was in one spot. Sorry. She repeated over and over. "Hey, it's okay. You can stop bowing, Tomoko. Seriously, please stop before you hurt yourself." She stood straight up. "Sorry?" She quickly said, "It's a horrible habit that I've developed. I just can't seem to break it. I apologize if this is a horrible first impression." Izuku held up his hand. No. Let's just get into the classroom." He led the way into the room and walked into the room with Tomoko by his side. "By the way, I think you owe me an explanation of your quirk, seeing as how you used it on me." She laughed. "Sure, I'll tell you later though. I'm still sorry for attacking you though. If you want though, you can blame it on the spiky-haired guy over there." She tilted her head towards Katsuki. Izuku looked past her. Of course he did. Tomoko walked over to the blue-haired teen Izuku met during the exams, who was standing next to a desk right next to Kaken's. While he walked over to Katsuki and rested against a pillar that was between two windows. "So, how did you get Tomoko to use her quirk?" Izuku wasn't particularly that he was attacked by Katsuki, seeing as he was the one that elicited the reaction. But he didn't know how his friend was feeling about it. He only recently had rekindled his friendship, having missed several years of it. "Well, she bragged about being the strongest in the class, so I told her to show off her quirk and aim it towards the door. You just so happened to walk through the door as she did." Izuku let out a hearty laugh. "That wasn't a coincidence, was it?" Katsuki shook his head and put his feet on the desk. "Of course not, but now we're even." Izuku looked at Tomoko as she seemed to get chewed out by the blue-haired teen. He was making robotic hand gestures as he did. Suddenly, he went quiet and stared directly towards Katsuki. "Hey, get your feet off of that desk right now." Katsuki blew air out of his mouth. "I really couldn't give two right now, so F right off if you will." The other teen gasped. Izuku cleared his throat. "Apologies for my friend's rude behavior. He doesn't know how to be nice." The blue-haired teen squared his shoulders. "Well, I thank you for your apologies, but he is still disrespecting the seniors who have sat in that desk before and the people who built it." "Kaken, take your feet off the desk or I'll burn them," Izuku said very quietly. Katsuki sighed and reluctantly took his feet off the desk. "There, are you happy now?" he sarcastically said, though the blue-haired teen didn't know it was rude. "Thank you." "Say," he directed his attention towards Izuku, "we met during the exams. What's your name?" Izuku set his bag down next to the desk in front of Katsuki's. "It's Midoriya. Izuku, yours?" The teen did a quarter bow and extended an arm towards Izuku, which he took. "It's Ida Tenya. Nice to meet you, Izuku Midoriya." Izuku broke the handshake. "Likewise, Ida-kun." "Say, are you friends with Tomoko-chan?" He shook his head. "No, actually she was the one to start talking to me." She waved at Izuku. "I hope that we can become good friends despite trying strong to be heroes." Izuku nodded and looked at the three people near him. "I hope so too, Ida-kun. I hope so." Izuku repeated himself because he was distracted by something yellow coming through the door. What the hell is that?" When Izuku said that, everyone went silent and looked towards the big yellow bug-looking thing. "Good," it slunk across the ground and towards the teacher's desk. "It took 5 words for you all of you to be quiet. Definitely needs some work, but better than I thought." The thing stood up. A dull-looking face was surrounded by a yellow sleeping bag from what Izuku could gather. He could hear it being unzipped, and suddenly the teacher pulled out a box. "Grab one that's your size and then go out to the training field. Be there in 5 minutes." The man zipped his sleeping bag up again and fell to the ground. He then made his way out of the door by slinking along the ground. "Alright, that was weird." Izuku looked at Katsuki. "What would you say, Kaken?" Katsuki stood up. "I don't even know. What kind of F teacher would do that?" Izuku shrugged and walked over to the box to grab a medium-sized shirt and, apparently ours would. The clothing was blue with the UA symbol on the shirt. They appeared to be gym clothes. Izuku wondered as to who their teacher was and why they seemed to be crazy, but he shrugged it off because some teachers have insane ways to introduce themselves or teach. It took a bit over 5 minutes for Izuku to get dressed and make it down to the training field. He was somehow the first one there. He jogged over to where the teacher in the sleeping bag was. "You're the earliest here, yet you're still late." His voice seemed to show no emotion. Izuku looked down at his feet in shame. For some reason he felt as if he let this random person down. Not what I expected from the one with the best score on the entrance exam. Izuku looked up. He was confused as to where his teacher would take the conversation as he stared at his teacher's emotionless eyes. But he swore he caught a glimpse of pride within them. "Whatever," he slid off the sleeping bag. "You interrupted my nap, and now I won't get any shut-eye with the rest of you around." He instantly identifies the teacher because of the scarf. It was the underground hero Eraserhead, and he was staring at something behind Izuku. Izuku would have followed his lead, but he was amazed by the teacher. "So you're Eraserhead. It's so cool to have such a great hero as our teacher." The teacher rubbed his temple, and his capture device shot up from his neck, wrapping its way around Izuku's mouth. "Just shut up. There's no way someone can be this loud in the morning. Will you be quiet?" he asked. Izuku nodded and the capture device fell off of his face. "Good. Also welcome the person who got second place, Saito Tomoko, who got 1 less point than you Midoriya Izuku." Izuku looked at Tomoko. She got 164 points. "She'd have to have a powerful quirker, a powerful magic like mine. You both seem to demonstrate excellent combat abilities and control over your quirks, so it was no surprise both of you nearly tied." Personally, Eraserhead took the rest of his sleeping bag off. "I believe that Saito would have become in first if Midoriya hadn't grown scales and become stronger." Tomoko looked at Izuku with a wide-eyed gaze. "Oh yeah, there's the rest of your classmates." Izuku looked over at Tomoko, disregarding the people coming from behind him. "Is something wrong, Tomoko-chan?" She shook her head and slapped her cheek. "Nothing. I'll tell you later when we're alone." The crowd of students stood behind Izuku and Tomoko, prepares to hear their teacher out. Izuku, however, tunes the teacher out. His mind was racked with ideas as to why Tomoko was surprised when Eraserhead said something about the Dragon Slayer's special technique, Dragon Force. When a softball was thrown at Izuku, he nearly dropped it, fumbling with it the entire time until he caught it. "Since you got the highest score, you get to throw the softball first." A confused look was plastered on Izuku's face. "You weren't listening, just great. Stand in that circle and throw the softball as far as you possibly can. Also, whoever has the lowest score will be expelled from the school. Right now though, it might look like you'll be expelled for not listening." Izuku's heart raced as he felt everyone look at him. He wasn't comfortable with this many people looking at him. This caused his knees to buckle and wobble as he walked over to the circle. Taking a deep breath, Izuku put his weight into his right foot and slid it behind him. "Don't set the ball on fire, it's the only one we have," Aizawa said at the last possible moment, breaking Izuku's focus on the magic. His arm was transformed into a dragon's claw for a few moments before it turned back to normal when his concentration broke. So he threw the ball normally, if you'd call throwing it 3 meters to the left normal. 22 meters. Are you trying to get expelled on purpose?" Izuku took a deep breath. "No." His voice cracked as he said this. Nearly everyone laughed at Izuku, but he cleared his throat. "Oh. No, I'm not. I'd like to have a second try, Eraserhead." The teacher laughed. "You've had your chance." He had a ball in his hand which he threw towards Tomoko. "Saito, your turn to shine. Please show me you have more potential than Midoriya." She caught the ball reluctantly and slowly walked towards the circle. Izuku pleaded with her to not do this, to not make a fool of him. But she did it anyways. "I'm sorry, Izuku." She apologized on behalf of the teacher and got into position to throw the ball. A white light shone from her when she released the ball into the sky. It was thrown about 50 meters into the sky. Roar of the Sun Dragon. Izuku watched as she cupped her hands around her mouth and shot a beam of light out of it. The ball was shot even further into the air, so far that she couldn't see the ball anymore. 1,294 meters. 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃 said after 15 seconds passed. Good job, even better than Midori. You know what? Izuku interrupted 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃 by walking over to him. He noticed there were softballs in his sleeping bag, so he grabbed one and walked back towards the circle which Tomoko had left. You're done, Midoriya. Put that ball down or I'll expel you. Izuku didn't pay attention to the teacher and got into position. Izuku's arm transformed again and started to become fiery, so he was about to throw it, but something wrapped around his arm. That's it, Yumi off. More of the capture device restricted Izuku and started to pull him out of the circle. 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃's eyes began to glow red, a sign of him using his quirk erasing quirk, but it didn't work to 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃's surprise. No, Yumi off. Izuku let out a strained roar as flames shot out of his body, incinerating the capture device restricting him. This also burned off his clothes, scales covered his back. Roaring claw. He pulled his arm back and threw the ball insanely high into the air, of the fire dragon. His hands covered his mouth and tightened his roar of fire until it was similar to a water gun. His flames extended further than ever, but the spread of them was smaller. This pushed the ball even further into the air, even farther than Tomoko's. Izuku took 2 deep breaths before he turned around. He saw that 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃 was stamping out the flames that were spreading further up his capture device. What in the absolute hell is wrong with you, Midoriya? You think that this, Aizawa gestured to the fiery scarf as he stomped out the last of the flames, bits and pieces of the device were scattered around Izuku's feet, was a good idea. Izuku began to calm down and realized what the severity of what he had just done. His scales began to retreat into his body and his arm turned back to normal. He began to wonder if he'd be expelled, but that soon stopped. He knew that 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃 wouldn't expel him over this, because he didn't burn the ball, and he proved to be brave enough to go against a teacher. But why would he want to have a teacher like this? One who would prevent him from using all of his power. One that would be in butt. One that would embarrass him in front of his classmates and make him slightly grow as a person. That's probably why he did it, to see if he'd have the ball to be a hero. 𝗏𝗏 was the best idea I've ever had, Izuku said, and you can expel me if you want. I've already proven something to myself, something that you wouldn't understand. Izuku walked over to the exit of the field with his head held high, but was stopped by a capture device circling around his 𝗧𝗍𝗃. Wasn't that destroyed? Izuku thought as he was yanked backwards and to the ground. He coughed as he hit the ground. You lit something on fire and thought that was a good idea? Izuku didn't dare nod as he grit his teeth. He wouldn't respond to it, but, well then you were right. His jaw loosened. You proved me wrong, and showed that you can actually be more than you seem. Now get up and stand with the rest of your class. 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃 threw the ball to the next person. Izuku stood up. He wasn't confused by the teacher's actions, but he was most certainly curious about why he went that direction. He ignored Tomoko trying to speak to him and went behind everyone else. Far behind them he rested against a wall. Well, that was horrible. I made such a fool of myself, but I guess I proved 𝗬𝗧𝗍𝗃 wrong, and probably everyone else. Izuku observed the rest of his classmates throw the ball. He could feel Tomoko looking at him the entire time, but he ignored it. After the last ball was thrown, Tomoko walked over to him. I'm sorry for it. Izuku held his hand up. Save it, you already apologized, so there's no need to. I just wish he didn't act like that, made me look like an idiot. Izuku held his forehead in his hand. I thought you looked like a badass. Izuku looked up at her and laughed in her face. I'm sorry. That's not what first came into mind when thinking about that. He wiped a tear that was forming at the side of his eye away. So anyways, you're a dragon slayer? Tomoko asked. Yeah, it's kind of why I was told not to throw the ball. Mainly because of how destructive it can be. Speaking of which, you're also a dragon slayer, a sunlight dragon slayer if I had to guess. She giggled. Yeah, mine's not really destructive. It's meant to heal and help the people I'm fighting with in a battle. She played with her hair. You know, it must be really weird for people to see you standing over here with the person who was made an example of. You should go back to the rest of the students. Just call me over when I have to do a test. Please. She sighed. Sure, Midoriya. She walked away. Also, you should probably put on a shirt, whether it's made of fire or not. Izuku looked down and a slight blush appeared on his face. Instead, a layer of scales made their way onto his body. After 6 other tests, the exam was over. The rankings for each test was projected onto a digital screen when they were back in the classroom. It wasn't a surprise that Tomoko was first. She had come in first for 3 exams and came in second for 3 other ones except the meter toss, which she came in third for. Izuku was second with 3 first places, 3 second places and 1 fourth place, putting him right behind Tomoko. A person named Minoru Mineta was last, but it didn't matter according to the teacher, who claimed that it was all a strategic ruse to make them perform at their best. Izuku didn't fall for this. He knew this from the start, especially when he was the prime candidate for an expulsion. Nearly everyone else was surprised, even Tomoko, who was easy to fool because of her innocence. After this whole thing, class ran for 2 more hours before it ended. Izuku walked out of the door with Tomoko and Katsuki at his sides. He was rather quiet because he let the 2 butt heads. For some reason, the calm Tomoko was rude whenever Katsuki was around. Maybe his 𝗧𝗵𝗲 rubbed off on someone, or maybe it was because he was utterly rude to her. Regardless, he thought the 2 would become good friends in due time, but he grew tired of listening to their constant fighting, so he flew off after taking off his shirt. He flew all the way onto his balcony and opened the sliding glass door into his home. Toru was chopping up some meat within the kitchen. When she saw him, her expression became brighter and she was happy because her dragon tail was moving behind her like a cat's. "How was school, Izuku?" He set his backpack down and walked over to her. He grabbed the knife and set it to the side. As he hugged her, he sighed through his nose and buried his face into her hair. "I missed you so much today. Everyone is annoying compared to you." They spent a minute hugging before Izuku broke away and her on the lips. "Well, I'm sorry to hear that, Izuku. I hope it becomes better." She smiled warmly at him. "I hope so too, otherwise I'd be a laughing stock." He muttered the last part. "What was that, Izuku?" Kanna ran up to him and jumped towards him. "Nothing. Oh, hey Kanna." He caught her. "How was your day today?" She eyes sparkled as Izuku head pat her and hugged her at the same time. Toru, on the other hand, was happy with Izuku. She couldn't ask for anyone better than him, because he was someone that can only be met once in a lifetime, perhaps even more than that, and she began to dream about what might be. "Hey Toru," she snapped out of her trance. "Yes, Izuku?" He put Kanna down and stared directly into Toru's appealing eyes. "I hope you know that I really love you." A stupid, wide, toothy grin appeared on his face, causing Toru to do the same. "I love you too, Izuku, and you mean the world to me." The 2 thought at the same time. As they stared longingly into each other's eyes, the 2 truly realized how the other meant to them. For Izuku, it was everything in the world. Despite only knowing her for a small fraction of his life, Toru really improves upon it, and not just because of the magic. She was his aide, the one who actually helped him get off his poor, useless feet and become something better. Something that could only be accomplished with her, something that only she could have caused. And for Izuku, Toru knew he meant more to her than anything she had ever seen or met before, possibly even the universe. Even the universe. He gave her life a purpose, more so than just being daddy's little daughter who disliked the idea of going to war against the humans from her world. She would do anything to protect the lover of her life, and he would do just the same, even if it meant they had to lay down their life. Izuku slowly opened his eyes, due to the annoying amount of light that was filtering through his bedroom and directly hitting his eyes. He rubbed the sleep out of them and looked over to the other side of his bed. It lacked a certain someone, so he looked to his door to see it slightly ajar. He looked through the crack and saw Toru, already in her maid's outfit and dusting something. He heard the rising volume of a tea kettle whistling, which caused Toru to tend to whatever type of tea she was making. Izuku blinked once, then twice, and swung his leg over the side of his bed before grabbing his phone. He turned it on and looked at the time and date. It was 6:48 and the 4th of August. Why today of all days, he thought as he stood up, stretching as he did. He wore gray sweatpants to bed last night, but had to take them off in order to get dressed in his uniform for school. After about 7 or so minutes, Izuku walked out of his room to see Toru sitting on the couch. A still piping hot cup of tea rested on the coffee table in front of her. But she was clutching something with an odd shape, and so Izuku tried to peer over her shoulder, until the floor creaked beneath him. Toru quickly hid the thing and turned around to look at Izuku. "I didn't know you were awake, Izuku." She nervously said, "How did you sleep?" Izuku scratches the back of his neck. Pretty good, he said. He yawned. By the way, what did you just set to your side, I'm curious? A bead of sweat appeared on her face and slowly rolled down. It's nothing for you to see. 𝗂𝗃 just wanted me to make her something for her friend. She seemed to be anxious, because she was tapping her foot against the floor. Oh, well, thanks for taking care of her, Toru. He walked until he was next to her, and sat down. Surprisingly, the object wasn't there. Who's her friend anyway? Toru's foot stopped tapping. She seemed to freeze up. It's 𝗧𝗍𝗍, I believe. She quickly muttered the last part. What was that, Toru? I couldn't hear you. Izuku grinned smugly, knowing that he had caught her in what was most likely a tiny lie. I said her friend's name was 𝗧𝗍𝗍, nothing but that. He hung his head low. He was hoping to see what she was making. He leaned in and gave her a peck on the cheek before standing up. I'm gonna make some breakfast before I leave. You want any? Toru shook her head. I made some 𝗬𝗵𝗲 for you. It should be on the counter next to the stovetop, she said, letting out a sigh of relief as Izuku walked away. She grabbed the object from between her thigh and the couch, and used some teleportation magic to move it into Izuku's room. She followed Izuku, who was somehow already sitting at the table with the dish of food she made earlier, and sat down opposite of him. Toru believed she had moved the object into his closet, but she didn't really know where it was since she moved it in a hurry. Izuku sighed. So who is this 𝗧𝗍𝗍 anyway, and how come 𝗂𝗃 hasn't told me about her friend? Izuku took his fork and cut into the 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Steam poured out of it as he lifted it up to his mouth and took a bite. He melted into it because it was delicious. I don't really know. I thought she would have already told you, Toru responded. Her tail stirred a bit as she waited for Izuku's reaction to her food. This is really great, Toru. Probably better than I could make? Izuku said with a smile growing on his lips. It only grew because of how excited Toru looked after he said this. Thank you, Izuku. Behind her the door to 𝗂𝗃's room opened, and 𝗂𝗃 came out of it with her yellow cap for school on. Good morning, 𝗂𝗃-chan. Are you already ready for school? Toru said as she turned around and followed 𝗂𝗃, with her eyes, as she walked over to Izuku's side and tugged on his sleeve. He looked down in a fake confusion. Did something just tug on my sleeve, Toru? I don't think there's anything here. 𝗂𝗃 puffed up her cheek. It's me, 𝗧𝗍𝗍. I tugged on your sleeve, she said cutely. Oh, 𝗂𝗃. I didn't see you there. Good morning. He laid his hand down on her head. So, I've heard that you made a friend. She nodded her head and Izuku's eyes lit up. That's amazing to hear, 𝗂𝗃. I'm proud of you. Her face became brighter because of Izuku's recognition. But Toru was jealous of the attention Izuku gave to her, but she digressed. The only reason was because she realized that this kind of behavior should be encouraged by parents and that Izuku was doing what any good parent would do. So, what do you need? He asked. Clearly she wanted to do something because after exiting her room, the first thing she did was walk over to Izuku and pull on his clothing. I wanted to ask if I could go with 𝗧𝗍𝗍 to her house. Can I, Izuku-san? Izuku nodded his head. Of course. Just come back before 7 o'clock tonight. Izuku was going to say she needed Toru to go with her, but she remembered that she was a dragon and could fly home. Her eyes sparkled. Thank you so much, Izuku-san. She held her arms up, and Izuku picked her up. She gave him a hug. It's what I do, anyways. He glanced over at the tune displayed in the oven. Ah shoot, you gotta go now. He let her down. Go, get going or you won't be able to go to 𝗧𝗍𝗍's house later. Izuku motioned with his hand to the door, and 𝗂𝗃 took off running. Bye, Izuku, she said as she left the apartment. Izuku sighed. You're really good with children, Izuku? Toru said, causing Izuku to chuckle. No, I'm not. I just did what my dad would have done if he was in this position. Izuku cut his food once again and went to take a bite. From it, he did this while looking away from Toru. Izuku bit down, expecting to bite into the fluffy egg, but he bit down on the fork only. Izuku, your food fell back onto your plate. He said nothing more and turned towards his food. Sulking over it, he took slow bites. Toru pushed her seat out and stood up while pushing it back. She walked over to Izuku and fell onto him, embracing him in a hug. Look, Izuku, she said quietly, I don't know what happened to your dad, but I'm truly sorry for whatever did happen. I know it must be devastating. She didn't let on to what she knew, which was still really small. A single tear rolled down Izuku's cheek and onto the table, creating a plop sound when it hit the table. He placed a hand on Toru's shoulder. She went quiet for a few moments. You're an amazing person, Toru. You don't know what I'd do right now without you. For the rest of the time he was home, he ate and wept in silence with Toru's arms still wrapped around him, with some memories of his father flooding through his mind. Some of his best moments with his father happened before he turned 4 years old, so he hardly remembered them. Only through being told what happened could he remember. And the time ended before he could get it off of his mind. He left the apartment with a distant gaze affixed to his face. Hopefully this depression would end rather quickly. Maybe with the help of his friends he'll get better, Toru had thought. But it most likely was going to be impossible, because even she couldn't help him. That wasn't the only thing she was thinking though. Just what caused Izuku to act like this? The answer had to be in his room, most likely with the photos since he was talking about his dad. Toru took a moment and really thought about it. Could today be the anniversary of his father's death? Her inner voice yelled when she finished the sentence. No, that can't be right, unless he didn't want to tell me, which is totally fine with me, I mean. She didn't know what to think. Instead she decided it'd be best to do something special in order to cheer him up. And so, she went into his room and retrieved the object, which she thought she had transported into his closet, but it was plain on his bed. It was a sphere that had a bronze detailing within it. The material surrounding it made it seem like it was from outer space with how abyssal the coloring looked, but she recently went to her dimension to procure one of these. There were numbers within the bronze. It seemed to be a locking mechanism of some sort. Alright, let's open this. She spun the bronze in different directions a couple of times and the sphere cracked open. A projection of the sphere popped out of it. Alright, let's open this. It repeated what Toru said. Hey, it works. Now, since he was sad about his father, maybe some good memories would cheer him. I think Miss Kobayashi's number should be somewhere in here. She gestured to the entire apartment before she closed the sphere. I don't want you to get any funny ideas and continue to catch my memories, 'cause if you did, then I'd destroy you. She spoke to the device as if it was a person, which would have shocked anyone listening to her. After half an hour of traveling by train, Izuku made it to UA. He acted slightly happier than he was, and it would have worked if that one thought didn't linger within his mind. Izuku sat down in his seat. He made some small talk with Kaken before class started. Every other class passed quickly, mainly because he only somewhat paid attention. By the time high noon came around, Izuku heard the sound of calm, yet heavy footsteps approaching the room. Apparently only he could hear them, since no one else tore their attention away from their conversations. Do you hear? The door slid open at breakneck speeds. I have come through the door like a normal person. Izuku looked, his eyes wide open, towards the figure standing in the doorframe. It was All Might, one of his favorite heroes, who was second to first. It was obvious why he wasn't first, seeing as how his own father was a hero. Yet he was the number one hero in so many people's hearts while also being the number one villain in others. Everyone else was extremely excited to see the top hero make an entrance into class like this. Everyone except Izuku, of course. Izuku watched nonchalantly as All Might walked weirdly over to the podium-like thing where Present Mic was just standing. Izuku tuned out the several people who yelled out that All Might, the number one hero, was standing in front of him, including Mineta, who was the loudest and most annoying. When he stood at the podium, Izuku tuned back in. We'll be putting your abilities to the test today, in the form of a battle test. Or training, whichever one you prefer. And for that, he pulled out a small remote and clicked the only button on it. The wall next to him started whirring as if mechanisms were moving and working. The wall flipped over to reveal briefcases. You'll need these. Before we had you come here, we had you fill out a costume request form with specific needs that pertain to your quirk. Izuku counted that there were 19 briefcases there, when there were 20 students. There are costumes for each one of you who submitted a form, otherwise if you didn't, then you'll have to use your gym uniform for now. All Might said to everyone. Izuku knew why there were only 19 briefcases. Because he never submitted a design for his costume. Which he had. It was a gift that Toru had given to him the night before. She got it from her dimension along with the hologram projecting sphere a few days prior when both Izuku and Kanna were out of the house. It was a simple flame-retardant shirt that had no sleeves or a front to it. It seems that he had to make up for it with his scales. Along with a pair of his shorts that she cast a one-time use fire-resistant spell on. Other than that, Izuku had to supplement for parts of his outfit. Now, go get changed and meet me at training site beta? It would have looked weird if Izuku just wore a completely black outfit that didn't cover his entire body with a pair of sneakers, so he bought a pair of sandals. Just the thought of wearing his outfit made the skin in Izuku's body tighten and transform into scales. But he suppressed the thought and pulled the clothing out of his bag. Izuku walked out with the rest of his class, his costume in hand and with a very slight hunch that was unnoticeable unless you knew him. It took 5 minutes for Izuku to change and 7 minutes to head out with the rest of his class to training site beta, which was similar to the city Izuku fought in for his entrance exam. Oh wait, it was the city he fought in. There was the crater the size of the robot he destroyed, which was way down the road. Regardless, he stood in the back and against the wall of a nearby building. His costume was rustling with the wind, and he still had his skin showing, not scales like he was supposed to. He was sulking as well as listening to All Might's explanation of what they were going to do. Alright, now that you all are here, I'll explain what you'll be doing today. First, I'll break you off into 10 teams of 2 and assign you a role, either heroes or villains. The villains will begin inside this building and will have 10 minutes to find an area to place a fake explosive device. For the heroes, you will have 15 minutes to locate the device and fight against the villain team in order to disarm it, which you do by touching it. You could also capture the enemy team to win. All Might explained. Any questions? Instead of raising their hands, several people just shouted out their questions. Are you going to expel someone like 𝗧𝗵𝗲 did? Can I just blow everyone away with my quirk? What if my quirk accidentally heals my foes instead of hurting them? From the brown-haired girl Izuku was going to save, of course Kaken would talk about blowing someone up, and Tomoko with her dragon-slaying quirk that could cause more help than damage. Well, I have the quirk of super strength, not super hearing. So one question at a time, All Might held a hand weakly in front of him. He obviously couldn't handle teaching students. No, I'm nothing like 𝗧𝗵𝗲. No, you can't blow everyone away with your quirk, and you'll have to work past that flaw with your quirk. Anyways, here are the teams. Team A is Midoriya Izuku and Uraraka Ochako. Team B is Todoroki Shuto and Shuji Kuji. Team C is Yaoyorozu Momo and Minor Mineta. Team D is Bakugo Katsuki and Tomoko Akiko. Team E and beyond is the same as the anime minus Team I, which is Ida Tenya and Masahiro Ojiro. All Might said, which confused the very one except Izuku who knew it was a fourth wall break. What do you mean by that, All Might sensei? Nothing, just get into your teams and greet each other. Teams A and D are up first, A are the heroes and D are the villains. The match will begin in 1 minute for the villains, and 11 for the heroes. So, it's nice to meet you Midoriya, I'm Ochako Uraraka. She extended an arm out to Izuku, he looked at it and looked at her face. Let's just get this over with, I'm not here to be friends or anything, at least not today. So let's just make a plan for you to go after Tomoko-chan while I take on Bakugo. Izuku said. He sighed and a few embers of flame came out with his breath. You're fine with that? It didn't sound like he was asking, more like he was ordering her to fight against the weaker person. Okay, do you have any strategies to fight her? Izuku shook his head. I hardly know her, I just know she's not as strong as Bakugo. Izuku still hadn't changed his skin into scales, which was still weird since it was meant to provide him the armor his costume was supposed to give. Oh well, thanks. She was clearly weirded out by Izuku and his attitude, but he didn't care or pay attention. He just waited out the time by thinking, God, how could I nearly forget what today was? I was so happy until today, just why did school have to start the day before his death's anniversary? Maybe this is why Mom didn't want me to come to UA, probably because she knew that it's where Dad went and that it'd start right at the anniversary of his death. Now that I think about it, I wouldn't be able to be as good of a hero as him. I'd only be a second-rate Midoriya. Izuku was torn from his thoughts when he saw Uraraka ran inside. The battle must have begun, so Izuku ran inside with her. It took Izuku and Uraraka a few minutes before they came across anyone else. The two of them were running down a corridor, when Izuku heard 2 sets of feet running down the stairs. He pulled her by the arm and against the nearest wall, he held a finger up to his mouth and made an audible shushing sound. 𝗵𝘃𝗲, just calm down, we can take on the 2 of them together. But you need to be quiet for that to work. Izuku heard Tomoko yell, ambush in 3, 2, 1. He ran silently towards the end of the hall, which was where 𝗵𝘃𝗲 stood. Oh. Leave Izuku to me. You can take round face. When he reached the end of the hallway, Izuku jumped towards them, his fist covered in fire. He aimed his fist towards Katsuki, but didn't account for Tomoko to come down the stairs. 𝗵𝘃𝗲, watch out. Izuku threw his fist towards Katsuki, but hit something solid in front of his friend's face. He glanced over at Tomoko, who was holding up her hands, and then back at Katsuki. His hand was lit and ready to blow up Izuku, but he breathed in and out. A torrent of fire boosted him backwards, just in time to miss Kaken's explosive fist. This isn't going to be good, Izuku said as he looked at Tomoko. She can create barriers. Why? 𝗬𝗏𝗏, change of plans. I'm going to need you to support me when I throw myself at them. Izuku didn't give her a chance to respond, instead he rushed towards them. His scales were actually covering his body this time. But that doesn't matter. He was just prepared to either kick butt, or get his butt kicked and be known as a disgrace to his father and mother. Izuku hit a barrier with his head as he ran towards Tomoko and 𝗵𝘃𝗲, and recoiled backwards onto the floor. He was dazed and confused down there, but he stood up and blinked a couple of times as to fix his messed up vision from hitting his head. Right in front of his face was 𝗵𝘃𝗲, and his fist was extended towards Izuku. He was punched in the jaw by him and was sent flying when he added an explosive twist to the attack. Izuku grew claws rather quickly and sunk them into the ceiling. He clung to it as blood spilled from his mouth. He spit it out though and put his other claw into the ceiling. Izuku pulled on the ceiling and swung his legs upwards. He then kicked off of the ceiling and brought it down alongside him. Izuku fell to the ground on the ceiling and broke it into 2 parts as he stood up. Oh, you messed with me now, 𝗬𝗏𝗏. Get over here and use your quirk on these stones. He yelled into the earpiece he didn't bother to attach to his ear. He pulled one of the pieces of the ceilings off of his claw and breathed fire towards 𝗵𝘃𝗲. It was redirected towards him with Tomoko's moonlit dragon abilities, so he quickly jumped up and pulled his arm up to block the incoming fire breath. Okay, Midoriya-kun. This one is floating. She ran to the other one when the fire faded. This one is also floating. Izuku pulled this one out of his claw and punched it, which shattered it into several dozen big chunks of rock and metal. Thank you, 𝗬𝗏𝗏. Now make me float and try to hold all of these stones, please. Izuku did the exact same with the other stone, one of which hit 𝗵𝘃𝗲 directly in the face. 𝗬𝗏𝗏 touched his back, which caused Izuku to float. I call this the starlit battlefield. Flames ignited on Izuku's calves and on his triceps. They flared to life and he was propelled across the hallway and towards Tomoko. In front of him, Izuku saw pebbles accumulate onto a surface, so he turned his calves a bit to the right and dodged one of Tomoko's barriers that she created. 𝗬𝗏𝗏. Go to the bomb, do that or hide. 'Cause I'm going to take these 2 down. Izuku's right ear twitched as it became more dragon-like. It seemed he was hearing something. 𝗵𝘃𝗲. Izuku seems to be focused on me. Go take care of 𝗬𝗏𝗏 while I handle him. Izuku opened his mouth a bit. Embers seeped out of his mouth as he grunted. His flames became brighter as he moved head first through the air towards 𝗵𝗃𝗏. Was a bad move to do. He didn't even notice the pebbles and stones that were gathering up on an invisible wall. So he slammed into it, but his flames didn't dim, they only got brighter and stronger and his gaze became inhuman. Izuku tore his claws from the wall despite how strong his flames were propelling him. He then shoved it and the nails that were now growing rapidly into the wall, and struck right through it. Tear through your defenses. He took his other hand and did the same thing. Matter what, Tomoko. He pulled them apart and ripped the wall open. He would have shot himself through it, but he suddenly fell to the ground, a sign that 𝗵𝘃𝗲 caught up with 𝗬𝗏𝗏. He landed on his feet with a thud, and continued to pull the wall apart. He tried to run through it after creating a hole in it, but he hit another wall. Izuku. Stop it, you aren't yourself. So stop or I'll have to hurt you more than I will right now. Suddenly, Izuku began to feel a strong pressure building up against his back, so he tried to stop it, but it constrained him in a small box and between two different walls. You think I'll stop? Izuku opened his mouth to reveal that most of his teeth were now fangs. I won't. I'll continue to come after you. He opened his jaw as wide as he could and took a bite out of the wall. Until I beat you, he said with his mouth full. He then began to 𝗧𝗃𝗁 in the rest of the wall. He swallowed it all and began to feel weird. He opened his mouth as he tried to tear into the next wall, but his claws hit nothing. Instead he just walked through, seemingly untouched by any walls. What? Why aren't the barriers working? Izuku walked closer to her. I don't know. He grabbed her arms and breathed fire onto her arms. They encircled them like a pair of cuffs. They should have hurt her, but something was preventing her from being burnt. And I don't care. Tell me what your dragon slaying ability is, before I go to take on Bakugo. She sighed. You captured me, so I guess why not? It's the Moonlight Dragon Slayer's ability. Izuku turned his back on Tomoko and saw Katsuki running towards him from the end of the hall. I may be out, but I'm not knocked out. So that means I can still help Bakugo. Izuku's black and green eyes widened. What? He grunted out. He watched as Katsuki suddenly became faster when he ran. Smart. Izuku took in a deep breath, but not as smart as what I'm about to do. Roar. He closed two hands around his mouth. Of the moonlit fire dragon. Izuku breathed out his normal fire, but it seemed stronger and mixed with something white. It consumed the entire hallway, shooting past Katsuki. The flames moved up to the floor above them through the hole in the ceiling. He held the roar for 15 seconds. When he quit at it, he saw that Katsuki was untouched. Ah, you really are a good dragon slayer, aren't you, Tomoko? Izuku's scales faded away. He fell to one knee and the flames surrounding her wrists disappeared. Izuku. She ran towards him and held him before he fell. Are you all right? Izuku laughed. Oh, that moonlight or whatever I ate is painful. So if you don't mind, I'm going to sleep. Good night, 𝗵𝗃. He couldn't even finish as light faded from his eyes and he dropped to the ground despite her best efforts. Jesus H. Christ. Tomoko quickly put her hands over Izuku. Small, mostly white, but nearly silver light came out of them. Come on. Please work. Izuku's body started to rise, so Tomoko knew that it was working. Okay, I'll have to do this carefully. She slowly moved her hands through Izuku's windpipe. Or you'll be in a much worse condition than right now. Suddenly she pushed her hand further forward and out of his mouth. A small amount of moonlight exited him. You should be fine, but just in case you're too fine. She pulled out a pair of cuffs from somewhere within her outfit. I'll just slip these around your hands, and win this for me and Bakugo. A hand latched onto her wrist. Go. Flames shot out of Izuku's forearm, and sent Tomoko flying back. Wow, I do not know what you did, but I feel much better. Thank you, Tomoko-chan. Izuku pushed himself off of the ground and sat down in a crisis cross pattern. So here. You can cuff me, but I think you have 5 seconds to do so. He held out his arms close together and aimed them towards her. A sudden booming voice came across a loudspeaker from somewhere inside the building. 5, 4. Tomoko scrambled to her feet and ran towards Izuku. 3, 2. She grabbed the cuffs and tried to hit one of Izuku's wrists with an open one. It wrapped around and closed around one. But not the other. Heroes win. By a technicality, of course, Izuku said after the voice stopped speaking. You did good, Tomoko, possibly better than Kaken. Izuku had a purpose behind those words, since Katsuki was behind him. She's what? Katsuki yelled, better than you. Though I'll give you the benefit of the doubt since you did put an end to the Starlight battlefield. By the way, he stood up and wobbled. How did you catch 𝗬𝗓𝗏? His attitude from earlier had shifted for some reason, probably because he was beaten by Tomoko. Katsuki, Tomoko, 𝗬𝗓𝗏, and Izuku walked out of the building and towards where the rest of the class was. They were at the door right before them, so Izuku walked ahead of everyone and held it open for them. So Tomoko created a wall of moonlight at the top of every 5th floor entrance. 𝗵𝗃𝗁, that was smart. Maybe if I didn't focus on fighting you all, then we would have truly won. Someone scoffed within the room. But you did win, you kicked the villain team's butt? Oh. I would have lost entirely if Tomoko didn't fix me up and I came back so fast. So it was a fluke that our team even won. Whoever said that. All Might cleared his throat. Anyways, who was the MVP of this battle? Someone raised their hand within the group as Izuku slumped against a wall alongside Katsuki. Yes. Well, it would have to be Uraraka-san. She followed through with Midoriya's plan and created a strong battlefield for Bakugo and Tomoko to fight inside of. Midoriya set the building aflame, Bakugo chased after Uraraka and took too long to get back into the fight, and Tomoko just stopped Izuku from doing too much damage despite being a villain. All Might nodded. Alright, next group get into the building next to it. I'll send for someone to staunch those flames that Midoriya Shounen set inside of the arena. Izuku chuckled awkwardly and scratched the back of his neck. My bad. Anyways, I think that I still have some moonlight inside my body, he said to Tomoko, who was next to Katsuki. What do you mean? Izuku held his hand out and a small white flash of light shot out. I mean this. But I think it should be okay, I don't inherently feel bad. Izuku flexed his arm. I feel stronger though. It's like it's coursing through my veins at this very moment. Her eyebrows furrowed. That shouldn't be possible. But I guess I wouldn't know, I'm not an expert on dragons. She pauses for a moment. I could do some research on them though. Here, I'll give you my number after this is over. She said. Izuku was surprised. He had already gotten a phone number from somebody on the second day of school. Okay, she added as she walked away towards the rest of the group. Katsuki nudged his arm. Do you think you can do me a favor and get me her number as well? Izuku snickered. Why, do you already like her? No, dumbass. I'd like to get to know her more though. She seems like a cooler nerd than you are. Izuku sighed. Sure, I'll try. Probably wouldn't get too far though. Izuku stared at the screen as several shots of a building could be seen due to several cameras. But he could only think about two things. Was he a disgrace to his parents for losing this battle? And why did he get this new power from eating Tomoko's moonlight, and how does it work? He'd have to ask about both of those later though, 'cause his mom would most likely know the answer along with Toru with their respective questions. Izuku yawned when he opened the door to his apartment. The lights were off and it was pitch black inside. Hello? Is anyone here? He walked further into his apartment, even going so far as to flick the lights on. I guess that Toru and Kanna left for the day, then I guess that I'll be alone with my thoughts? He sat on the couch and leaned back in it. Dang it. Now I'm the one who needs someone else. He sighed and slung his backpack off of his shoulder. He didn't see that it hit something mid-air and slowly fell down. He rolled his eyes and sat back up. A weird spherical device was in his lap. Who put this here? He touched it and the lights shut off in his apartment, only to be filled with light from the device. What the hell? Tears collected in his eyes as he saw a projection of him and his dad from someone else's eyes. A younger Izuku was riding atop his father's shoulders, and they seemed to be in someplace far from home. All right, Izuku watched the sky. A whistle could be heard and something rocketed through the sky. A small explosion happened and several dazzling lights were seen in the sky. Hey Kimmy, why did you take us out here just to shoot off your magic? He stared off into the sky as he shot off more fireworks with his magic. Because I want to share this moment with just you. I want you to know that even if Izuku can't develop a quirk or learn how to use magic, then I wouldn't ever be disappointed in him. I want him to know that I will never, ever be dissatisfied with him. I can only be proud with him. He's my son for Chris' sakes. A silence was shared between them as Izuku oohed and awed at the fireworks. He was about 2, maybe even younger. But why not tell him when he's so, right? You may not be around for him when he gets older, I would never know. They both said simultaneously, yeah, that's the basics of it. Hero work is always impossible to guess as to what would happen, so I wanted to tell you. So that you can pass on the message to him in case I'm gone and he needs it. The projection cut off and Izuku sat in the dark, tears streaming out of his eyes as he held the device in his hands. Thank you. That's just what I needed, Mom, to know that Dad thought highly of me, even if I was 2. Thank you so much, Mom, he cried as his mom appeared from behind him and hugged him. She waited for him to calm down before speaking, which took about 6 minutes. Even in heaven, I bet he's still proud of you. He put his hand on his mother's hand. Yeah, I guess he would be. But how did you even get here? He looked back towards her. Her hair was all messed up and looked as if it went through a wind tunnel. Oh, 𝗬𝗧 did this, didn't she? She nodded. Yep, work let me take the day off so that we can be strong for him together. I just wonder where she went off to. A small flame appeared in the corner. There she is. 𝗬𝗧, I have something to ask you. He said the next morning. Sure Izu, what is it? Izuku cleared his throat and stood up from his chair. I ate something I shouldn't have yesterday, and now I can do this? He held out his hand and a silver light was shining down onto some small flames. What is that light? Is it moonlight? Izuku nodded. You ate moonlight from another dragon slayer if I'd have to guess. He nodded again. Is it bad? Yes. I wouldn't know since I've never done it. I would expect you to be able to be fine though. Izuku furrowed his eyebrows as he sat down and spooned some rice into his mouth. Why do you say that? 𝗬𝗧 scratched the back of her neck. Well, there is something weird inside your body. I found it when I gave you some of my magic. It's not cancer or anything like that, so don't worry about that. But I think that it's some sort of magic. Izuku's heart thumped in his ears and his palms began to sweat. You're kidding, right? Did he always have magic inside of him? She averted his gaze. Right, 𝗬𝗧? Izuku was sitting in class about a week after getting his butt handed to him by 𝗂𝗂𝗃 and Tomoko. He wasn't doing much, just twiddling his thumbs and listening to Katsuki spew some insults out of his mouth. They were directed towards Tomoko for some reason, probably because she approached him. Get your dumbass purple hair out of my face, nerd. Katsuki yelled. No, why would I? How about you get your stupid spiky hair out of here? She retorted, it's not stupid. Izuku knew that Katsuki was extremely mad, because when his voice dropped and he didn't yell, it meant he was serious. Izuku leaned back in his chair and rested his head against Katsuki's desk. Hey, how about you two shut up and make out already? A blush grew on Tomoko's face, while Katsuki's was just befuddled. Shut the hell up Midoriya/Deku. The two of them yelled in tandem. Izuku chuckled, causing Tomoko to return to her seat with a scowl on and her face the shade of a tomato. Izuku tilted back forth in his chair and touched the ground again. That was when Eraserhead walked in. Eraserhead walked over to his lecture podium and leaned against it. You're all going to vote for a class president and a vice president today. Do it in whatever way you'd like, I don't care enough. Izuku didn't even notice the bright yellow sleeping bag around him, but it was suddenly zipped up. When Eraserhead fell to the ground, the majority of the class, nearly everyone on the left side, broke out into yells and screams for who should be president. If I become class president, then I'll make all the girls' skirts inches shorter, shouted some random purple-headed pervert. A visible tick mark could be seen on Izuku's head as tried to rest in his seat. No, pick me. Pick me. A pink-skinned girl repeated, causing Izuku's eyebrow to twitch every time she said it. I'm the only person right for this position. Izuku heard some sort of footwear slam down onto the desk behind him. So choose me to be your ruler. Izuku sighed and casually got out of his seat. He looked up at Katsuki. Shut your... He kicked the desk he was standing on, pushing it to the wall and sending 𝗂𝗃𝗃 crashing to the ground face first. Goddamn mouth. All of you. I can't even think with you all screaming in my ears. So shut the hell up. The whole class looked towards Izuku when he kicked Katsuki to the ground. Thank you, he cleared his throat. Katsuki began to get up, but Izuku put one of his legs on his back and pushed him down. Now, we should decide who our class president should be democratically, then it wouldn't be complete chaos in here. He took his foot off of Katsuki. You can get up now, 𝗂𝗃𝗃. He got up. Don't do stupid 𝗧𝗟𝗃 like that again, or else. Izuku warned as a small flame came out of his mouth. He didn't even pay attention to the onyx-haired speaking. All he did was have a glaring contest with Katsuki, until he sat down at least. Okay, take a piece of paper from the podium and write a name other than yours on it. Then put it in this basket when you're done. The same girl said when Izuku began to listen. Izuku didn't even vote on who should be the vice president. He just sat in his chair and relaxed by leaning backwards. Did everyone vote? The onyx-haired girl asked. Yeah, everyone did. Izuku called out with his eyes closed. He heard the shuffling of paper from his curtained eyes. And after several long, boring moments, the girl spoke up again. So it seems that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is our class president with N-. A loud roar could be heard overhead, causing Izuku to tip and fall in his seat. What the hell? He stood up and walked over to the window, along with the rest of the class. He saw a dark, dragon-like silhouette fly across UA's courtyard. He pushed the window near him open after unlatching it, his skin changed and he urgently jumped out of the window. He plummeted to the ground, but at the last moment his wings shot out of his shirt and flew back upwards. "Tomoko, follow me," he called out to her from outside. He flew above the roof of UA and began to chase down the dragon. The dragon was pure black. The sun that gleamed off its scales was swallowed up by the darkness of them. After a few moments, Tomoko caught up with him and was running next to him. "Why the hell is there an actual dragon in our world?" she yelled at him. "I don't know why, but we have to catch up to it quickly. So use your Dragon Slayer art on me so I can catch up to it." He yelled at her. She held up her left hand and a beam of light shot towards Izuku. Suddenly he felt stronger and faster than before, so he flew like a bullet towards the dragon. A tingling sensation filled his body. Maybe it was the lightning he consumed a while back. Maybe it was Tomoko's magic working on him. Regardless, the dragon reared its neck and roared towards Izuku. A black beam shot towards him, so he dodged, but barely. He noticed that a piece of his shirt was caught in the beam. But when it dissipated, the shirt seemed to be vaporized. Along with several clouds that were in the sky, Izuku could tell because there was a giant hole going through everything. "Tomoko-chan, we don't stand a chance against this. It just vaporized everything in its path." Izuku flew in midair and aimed himself towards her as the dragon flew away. Yeah, let's do that. Instead of fighting it, just let it loose onto our world. 'Cause that sounds reasonable. She shouted at Izuku as she continued to run towards the dragon. Izuku sighed, "Don't be stupid, Tomoko." Izuku created a barrier of moonlight directly in front of her. She crashed into it and fell backwards. You do not stand a chance in the slightest against that thing. It can destroy anything with just a single roar for Chris's sakes. She looked directly at Izuku. "No. We literally have to go kill it. Because if it can do just that, then who knows what it'll do to the world." She yelled. Izuku sighed and flew closer to her. With a swift chop to the back of the neck, she was out cold. "You won't be fighting it, I will, hopefully not by myself though." Izuku pulled his phone out with his right hand. He picked Tomoko up with his left. He called the home phone, and after a few rings it was picked up. "Hello, Kobayashi residence? Thank God you picked up Toru." He heard Toru squeal in delight on the other end. "What do you need, Izuku-an?" Izuku took a deep breath as he stared at the dragon flying away in the distance. "Well, we might die, for starters. But there is a dragon flying above downtown and it can shoot out beams of literal death." He heard the phone drop and hit something. "Toru, are you there?" Directly after Izuku said that, he heard the loud sound of dragon wings beating. He looked towards his apartment and could see a green dragon fly from it. "Well, I hope neither of us die, Toru," he said before taking off in the dragon's direction. Izuku had followed the dragon until it had touched down in a grassy field in a forest. He had put Tomoko down on a random building. Surely she'd be able to get down when she awoke. "Alright, here goes nothing, I guess." Izuku descended like a bullet towards the dragon. He would have waited for Toru, but it'd be better to keep the dragon busy until the cavalry arrived. Izuku stopped in midair when he saw the dragon shift. A large flash of light appeared and blinded Izuku. When it subsided, Izuku saw a man laying down on the ground in the place of the dragon. It was another black-haired man, but his gaze seemed distant and his eyes were entirely black. Izuku didn't take the free chance to attack to fiddle with his fingers. No, he took the chance to breathe out a roar of fire. Roar of the fire 𝗧𝗍. He suddenly fell to the ground. Unconscious. The black-haired human sat up and looked towards Izuku's unconscious body. Shame. He stood up and wandered on over to Izuku. "I wouldn't have expected you to succumb to me that easily." He bent down over Izuku's body and reached in to touch him. A crazed look was in his eyes as he breathed in and out heavily. He was an inch from Izuku's face and was about to touch him, but he quickly restrained himself by latching onto his own arm. And no, I mustn't, they'd kill me if I did anything other than this. He heard the beating of wings above him. Oops, I guess our time is up, Izuku. But I'll be waiting for you at the end. The dragon turned human ran into the trees as Toru appeared overhead. It was just chance that Toru looked down and spotted Izuku, so she landed on the ground. Turning into a human, she ran towards him. Izuku. She slid over to his side and her hand went for his neck instantaneously. There was a pulse. Thank God you're alive, she quietly spoke before picking him up and bringing him into a hug. Toru was sitting down and tightly grasping Izuku's unconscious body when she noticed something off. It was something with his 𝗧𝗍𝗍. So she let him down, unbuttoned his uniform, and took a hold of his white shirt. She pulled it above his abs, which looked smaller than before. Then Toru noticed it was his 𝗧𝗍𝗍. His 𝗧𝗍𝗍 wasn't his. It looked too feminine, mainly because there were bub plastered onto it. A blush grew on Toru's face as she stared at the two small mounds of flesh that were now on Izuku's. She looked towards his face and noticed that it was now more feminine. She was breathing heavily, as if perverted thoughts were racing through her mind. Toru breathed out. A visible cloud of her breath could be seen as she reached over towards the bub. Toru pulled away when she stirred a bit. I must be dreaming, Toru said, before pinching herself. She felt the pain, but didn't suddenly awaken in the real world like Izuku told her. Nope. Not dreaming. Toru shrugged and decided to check inside her loose-fitting. Toru pulled them up and pushed the boxers down. A small amount of blood trickled out of her nose. Her assumptions about Izuku were right. He was now a girl. Izuku opened his eyes. Despite just waking up, he was exhausted. For some reason he was in his bed, though the last thing he remembered was meeting the weird dragon human in that field. So he blinked a couple of times. The sands of sleep brushed off of his eyes every time he closed and reopened them. As the sleep thinned from his eyes, Izuku began to see something orange laying across from him. It was Toru's hair. Somehow, he had forgotten that she slept in his bed now. Usually she slept facing him, but he had to guess she had flipped over in the night because she got too hot or something. It was always a pleasure to see her appealing face when he first woke up, but now it was devoid of that happiness he always gained in the morning. So Izuku stretched his legs. He couldn't reach the foot of the bed like normal, but he shrugged it off and felt his body lock up as he stretched his arms. It was a feeling of pure bliss, until it ended when he sat up. He tilted his neck from side to side and heard two bone-chilling cracks. He sighed in relief as he could still feel his lower half. It would have been pathetic if he cracked his neck too strong and actually severed the nerve connection to his legs. Regardless, he slid his legs over the side of the bed. They didn't touch the floor though. Which was odd for him. His feet had always touched the ground when he swung them over the edge. So he looked down and noticed they were shorter, his calves slimmer, and his thighs thicker than normal. His brow raised as he looked at his feminine lower half. What the dash? A strand of long hair fell in front of his left eye as he looked further downwards. He didn't even notice his now femininized voice. For some reason, two balls of flesh were attached to his 𝗧𝗍𝗍 and pushing his shirt out in front of him, so much so that he couldn't see his stomach. With a frantic hand, Izuku reached into his boxers and could tell that he wasn't a man anymore. Instead of the familiar member that was always there to meet him in the morning, he found nothing. Just a smooth and flat feeling against his hand. He touched something poking out from it, and instantly a wave of pleasure washed over him. Kaya! He shouted as an unnamed feeling washed over him, waking Toru up in the process. What's wrong, Izuku? Toru asked with a slur as she rubbed her eyes. She opened her eyes to see a female Izuku right in front of her face with tears streaming down her face. 𝗬𝗲𝗄𝗏 girl! She yelled quietly as to not wake Kana up, directly in Toru's face. Toru sat up and grabbed Izuku's right side. Even though she was still tired, she pushed Izuku down onto her side and made her lay down. Shush, you're too loud right now. She laid on her side directly next to Izuku. Toru stroked her boyfriend's, who was now a girl, hair to calm her down. Don't worry about it, just calm down and relax. Toru stared longingly into Izuku's cute eyes. The eyelashes that surrounded them were now longer and slightly curled upwards. Her cheek puffed up as she couldn't help but fall for Toru's signature puppy eye trap. Fine. The 𝗬𝗲𝗄𝗏 girl. Izuku asked peacefully as Toru continued to slide her long hair. Oh, I have no clue. You just started to grow. Toru reached down towards the bottom of Izuku's shirt. She grabbed onto it and quickly pulled it over Izuku's head. It met some resistance at her melons, but only for a few moments before Toru pulled it all the way off of her partner. Izuku's melons jiggled as they were pushed by the All Might t-shirt. A voracious look crossed Toru's face as she stared at Izuku's melons. Toru, what are yoa? She bit her lower lip as that same wave of pleasure from before washed over her when Toru cupped her right b. These cute bad boys when I found you. And I gotta say, I'm kinda surprised they're this big though. She tore her look from Izuku's melons and looked into her eyes. They were glassed over due to the pleasure most likely. Toru smiled deviously as her right fingertip moved over to Izuku's NPL. When her rather cold finger touched it, Izuku let out an stop. Please, Toru. Toru looked directly at her as she squeezed Izuku's right NPL, causing it to stand irked. Toru shifted closer towards Izuku and leaned into her ear. Make me. Toru's whistled cold breath into Izuku's ear, causing her to shudder and feel good from the cold air against her red-hot ear. Toru smiled as her hand reached for Izuku's, but her hand stopped Toru in its tracks. Izuku got on her knees and pushed Toru onto her back while still holding her hand. Izuku was positioned directly over Toru. Her left hand was directly next to Toru's head. No. We can continue this later, but right now Kanna-chan is awake. Izuku leaned in close to the awestruck Toru's ear. We can have tonight. Izuku moved her hand and let go of Toru's arm. She slid over to the edge of the bed and looked back at Toru. She was literally steaming from her ears. Izuku giggled lightly. Come on, Toru, you shouldn't dream about something that will happen later, it'll just ruin the experience. Izuku got up and made her way into the bathroom, but not before grabbing a pair of boxers from her closet. Izuku's hips, which jutted out a small bit from her sides, swayed as she walked. She didn't really seem too bothered by this sudden transformation, especially if it made Toru this excited. Regardless, Izuku walked into the bathroom and closed the door behind herself, locking it before she walked over to the shower. This doesn't feel the worst, she thought as she twisted the knob to the shower head. Cold water shot out of the shower head. But I will have to get clothing to fit me. Izuku looked down at her bare 𝗧𝗍𝗃. The nipples at the ends of each 𝗧𝗍𝗃 were standing tall because of the cold temperature of the bathroom. She knew not to touch it thanks to Toru being all gropey earlier. Izuku stuck her arm into the shower. The water that was running was now soothingly warm, so she took off her baggy sweatpants. Izuku's boxers were hardly staying on. Her boxers were a size 25, which was a kid's size. Izuku didn't care too much about how small they were, but she certainly had to get something to fit her. So she shrugged and slid them down her waist. She bent over as she did this and caught a glimpse of her body in the mirror. The mirror was slowly starting to gather fog on it. Izuku saw everything. I really do look cute as a girl, Izuku thought as she grabbed the bottom of her firm right 𝗬𝗲𝗏 and lifted it up. Only a small amount moved with her hand because of her below-average-sized melons. She let go of it and traced her hand along her side. She was really getting horny just by looking at her newly formed body. When she reached her thigh, she gave it a little squeeze. It wasn't too thick, but it was muscly and very tight. A hot, lewd breath released from Izuku's mouth as she moved her hand towards her nether regions. She was about to touch herself, but the mirror had fogged up too quickly and blocked her from seeing herself do it. Lame, she pouted, before sighing and pulling the shower curtain away and stepping into the shower. Unbeknownst to her, the remnants of the doorknob melted onto the ground. The door to the bathroom slowly opened up, and as it did, Toru peeked inside more and more. Until she actually stepped in. Staring at the shower, she could see Izuku's feminine silhouette as she messed around with her hair. A lewd smile crossed her face as an idea came across her mind. Please do not read this part until you are at least 13, and don't be a douchebag child if you are below that age. I won't write another lemon if that ever happens again, so, you have been warned. Do not read from here on if you are below 13. All the stuff may not be lewd, but still, you just shouldn't read the chapter if you are underage. Toru disrobed. She pulled Izuku's loose and biggest shirt from around her 𝗧𝗍𝗃. The shirt was a gift from one of his uncles after he turned 14. Although it was too big for Izuku, it nearly fit Toru perfectly. It was only because of her rather large double D cup melons that it fit rather snugly. When she pulled the shirt off, a rather cute pink frilly 𝗵𝗲 was covering her large melons. She reached around her back and unhooked the 𝗵𝗲. It fell down as the two strings came apart from one another. She then pulled it over her head. Her perfect melons didn't hang or sag, they sat comfortably and firmly directly off of her 𝗧𝗍𝗧. Her nipples, however, were already standing on edge. It seemed that she was aroused by the thought of Izuku's NDE body. Even if it was a girl's body, she still loved it. She just loved Izuku in general, even if he was now a girl. She slid off a pair of her shorts that Izuku had bought for her, revealing panties that matched her 𝗵𝗲. Somehow, she went unnoticed by Izuku, who should have already heard her undressing, but she was apparently silent. She stripped them off and set it off to the side with the rest of her magically folded clothes. She lightly walked over to the shower on her toes. She could hear each individual drop of water hit the ground as time seemed to slow down around her. Toru stood directly outside of the shower, her naked body moving up and down with each breath she took. "Hello," Izuku called out from the shower. She was probably alerted by Toru's breathing. Regardless, Toru grabbed a hold of the shower curtain and pulled it aside. She locked eyes with Izuku before hopping into the shower with her. "Why are you in here?" Izuku shouted as she covered up her nipples with her left arm and blocked her lower part with her right hand. She held a rather lewd pose as she tried to cover everything properly. Get out," Izuku yelled at Toru, but instead of leaving, she got closer. "But I can't love you." Her melons jiggled as she took one step towards Izuku. "Without walking closer to you." Toru took a step closer and the water from the shower head hit her in the face. She had seemed to forget about that due to her lust for Izuku's female body. She deadpanned and closed her eyes due to the water. "If you really wanted to take a shower, you could have waited for me to finish at least," Izuku said as she giggled a bit. She squatted down and plugged the drain with the stopper. The next thing she did was make the water run from the shower head to the faucet. "Alright. Since you were so eager to bathe with me, we can take a bath together. How does that sound, Toru?" She looked up at Toru. She wasn't lustful anymore thanks to the water hitting her face, but she wasn't gonna pass up on Izuku's offer in a lifetime. Toru was laying on top of Izuku's body in the steamy waters of the bathtub. Her 𝗧𝗍𝗧 was being squished down by Toru's back and Izuku had wrapped her arms around her stomach. They could both feel each other's heartbeats. Izuku's was slow and peaceful, while Toru's was racing from directly being able to touch Izuku's appealing body. Despite Izuku being directly behind her and out of her gaze, the two were quiet until Izuku rested her head on Toru's shoulder. "Hey Toru," she asked in a meek manner. "Why Izuku?" Izuku's hot breath on her shoulder was enough to make Toru start to blush. "Do you think that I'll ever be a guy again?" Toru sighed. "Of course. We'll find a way, we always do." She paused and looked downwards. Izuku's feminine legs were resting against her own. "But I wouldn't be bothered if you stayed this way forever." Izuku perked up. "I will love you forever and always, Izuku. Even if you are a girl, I will stand by your side until I die. Because I love you." Izuku smiled and rested her chin on Toru's shoulder. I really needed that, thanks Toru." Toru grinned. Can we do lewd stuff now?" Izuku furrowed her brow. "Is that why you came in here?" Izuku sighed. "I didn't expect anything less from you, Toru. You already know the answer, which is after 𝗂𝗏 goes to bed along with giving me a new name for now." Izuku stated. "Now let's just enjoy our bath together." Izuku sat at the kitchen table with 𝗂𝗏 sitting next to her. Meanwhile Toru was making breakfast for the three of them. "So 𝗂𝗏, is there anything you want, Izuki?" Izuku nearly fell off her seat when Toru suddenly shouted. Izuku's chair tipped to the side, but she caught herself on the edge of the table. "Why?" She pulled herself back up and looked at Toru. "Are you shouting random things?" "That's what we should call you from now on, Izuki." Even though she was facing away from the newly named Izuki, she could tell that Toru was smiling like an idiot, mainly because of her dragon tail that was swaying from side to side. "Okay," Izuki said. "Anyways 𝗂𝗏, do you want to do something today? We could go to the park, or I want to see 𝗧𝗍𝗵𝗲 Kobayashi." 𝗂𝗏 interrupted. A tick mark grew on Izuki's forehead. "Mrs. Kobayashi is my mom, 𝗂𝗏. Just call me Izuki." She shook her head. "Do you need me to take you to her house?" Or call her parents at least. 𝗂𝗫 shook her head. No. I can get there by myself for plot progression. Toru gasped loudly in the kitchen. What did I tell you about breaking the fourth wall, 𝗂𝗫? 𝗂𝗫 put her pointer fingers together. To not break it? Correct. Now fix it? Toru demanded. All the while Izuku was questioning what the hell was going on between the two. What was a fourth wall? I asked her yesterday if I could come over and she said yes. Also, I wouldn't want to bother you, Ms. Kobayashi. I can fly there. 𝗂𝗫 said like the cutie she was, but Izuku was still that she was being referred to as her mother. Izuku set her head against the table as 𝗂𝗫 got off of her chair and headed for the door. Oh, you're leaving already, 𝗂𝗫-chan, she heard Toru say as her soul was out of her body and replaced with her mother's. She heard an audible nod from 𝗂𝗫. All right then, stay safe. Toru called after her. Izuku heard the door close shut. All right, I made a bit too much food. She heard Toru say as she was essentially having an out-of-body experience. But dig in. Izuku smelled the delicious scent coming off of the food, sending her right back into her body and into an upright position instantly. She looked at the Americanized meal in front of her. The plate consisted of these weird strips of mystery meat that looked like bacon, and simple eggs with a side of rice. Toru, the meat wouldn't happen to be your tail meat, would it? She asked, suspicious of the gray meat. She saw a bead of sweat roll down Toru's forehead. No, it's just weird bacon. Izuku laughed at her response. Toru, you know that I'm not going to eat your tail. She looked at her directly in the eye. When I can just eat you. Toru's pupils became literal hearts as her heart skipped a beat. She was already excited because of what her partner had said. Let me finish my breakfast first, then we can get to the action. Izuku finished her meal and cleared everything off of her plate minus the dragon tail scraps. She wouldn't ever eat that, no matter how much she'd be paid for that. She cleaned her plate in the sink after throwing away the bacon. So, Izuku, can we do it and dash? Yeah, we can, Toru. Izuku placed the plate down into the drying rack next to her. She walked up to Toru, grabbed her hand, and pulled her along to their room. More like being dragged since Toru was essentially fading out of the world due to how excited she was. Izuku opened the door to their room and walked over to the bed with Toru before pushing her down onto it. She was pinned down with Izuku putting both her arms next to either side of her head. She snapped back to reality when Izuku said her name. Are you sure you want to have a see now? We can wait until we're mar dash. Toru put a hand on Izuku's shoulder and pulled her in for a deep embrace. Izuku was surprised as to how forcefully Toru stuck her tongue into her mouth, but she was definitely not complaining. It already felt like heaven. Toru held her close as she flipped Izuku onto her back, still French her like no tomorrow. Toru broke the embrace for a breath. I don't care about saving it until marriage. I want to have a CC with my cute girlfriend. Toru cried out as hearts took over her eyes and floated around her head. She then dove back in to embrace Izuku, who was as equally into this as Toru was. Toru reached down for Izuku's when she grabbed the hem of them. She slowly pulled them down. When they were around Izuku's knees, Toru grabbed the pair of boxers she was wearing before breaking the embrace once more, this time with feeling. Ready? Toru asked as her grip on the briefs tightened. Izuku replied with a nod. A wide smile replaced the look of lust that was plastered onto her face ever since she started to pull her along. So Toru, as lustful as she was, pulled Izuku's briefs down. She looked between Izuku's legs. A perfectly formed 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was centered between her two sizable thighs. Toru took her right hand and traced the outline of Izuku's PP. This small amount of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 was enough to make her Stop for a moment, Izuku said. Toru did just as she requested and stopped for a moment. It's unfair if you don't strip as well. As she said this, Izuku took off her own shirt, letting her melons hang loose and free against the once chilly room. Toru her lips in delight before standing up and sliding her own down her legs. She was obviously wearing a new set of panties, which were now purple with black horizontal stripes separating the colors. She then continued by taking off her shirt, revealing a matching BR. Izuku smiled like an idiot when Toru went back down on her. She unclasped Toru's BR and threw it to the side of them. She latched onto Toru's right BR, squeezing the NPL as Toru teased her down below with her hand. Izuku put her mouth on Toru's NPL and bit down on it like a baby would. Toru loudly due to how exciting it was. She looked at Izuku with a wild gaze and stuck her index and middle finger into Izuku's pages. "Oh God," she cried out, the feeling of something entering her felt amazing. It was even better because it was Toru, her loved one, doing it to her. "Don't stop, or go faster," she said before latching onto Toru's 𝗵𝗃 and play with the other one. The repeated motion of Toru's fingers inside of her got better and better with each time, and with each time, her fingers went deeper. In Izuku's mouth, Toru's NPL swelled, becoming bigger in her mouth, but easier to SEK on. Izuku's hips began to quiver due to how deep Toru was going. "Please, Toru," her now heart eyes quivered as a warm feeling was rising from within her. "Mess up my PP, Toru." A small amount of drool formed at the corner of her mouth, where her lips met. Toru, being the 𝗂𝗍𝗄𝗧 dragon she was, took Izuku's words, and turned them up to 11. So she took her other hand and teased Izuku's 𝗧𝗍𝗪 with it, making it tons more pleasurable for Izuku. Her hot only made Toru finger her even faster. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head. 𝗂𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗵𝗻. She shouted as a liquid shot from her 𝗧𝗏 and onto Toru's hand. She looked at it, then to Izuku. She had her head down and her eyes were partially closed as she out. This turned Toru on even more, so she brought her hand up to her mouth and the liquid. "Tasty, lemon is over. The rest of the story is now important too." The plot. Izuku was tired from coming, so she laid down next to Toru. "That felt great, Toru. We should really do this more," she said before wrapping her arm around Toru's stomach. "I'm sorry I couldn't make you come though." Toru laughed. Of _. She perked her head up as if she could hear something. Furrowing her eyebrow, Izuku sat up. "Do you hear something?" She transformed her ears into those of a dragon. She could now hear a quiet whistling in the sky. _. Toru put a finger up to Izuku's mouth and stood up. A glow appeared around her ND body and she was now wearing her maid outfit. She walked over to the door and into the kitchen. Izuku stood up and grabbed her boxers. Boom! A large crash sent Izuku to the ground as the ground around her shook. What the hell? She got onto her feet quickly and ran out of her room. She turned the corner and could see a looming shadow submerged in a cloud of dust, and it was holding Toru. Izuku gasped as she instantly channeled dragon force into her entire body, instantly becoming a demi-dragon. "Toru!" she shouted before flying towards her companion and her captor. Izuku flew towards her enemy, towards her lover. Her mind pleaded for Toru to be left unharmed by the bulky shadow of the foe. But that vision was soon put to an end when she heard a yelp of pain escape Toru's throat, which was being crushed by her captor. "Tohu!" Izuku shouted wrathfully. This caused her to fly even faster across the room, but it wasn't enough. The moment she was within grasping range of her dragon maid, the figure disappeared, taking Toru with him. Izuku flew directly out of the hole in the wall and staggered a bit in the air. Without any warning, something collided with the center of her spine, nearly shattered it as she was sent speeding to the strong, hot concrete ground. She hit the ground and nearly passed out upon impact with it. Whatever she was hit with packed a severe punch. A punch that she'd either have to block or dodge when the time came. "Insolent demi-human. Don't come after me or you will lose your head," the figure spoke from above her. Izuku propped herself up on her left elbow and pushed herself up with the right one. She got onto her knees and looked up to the sky. There Toru was, and being held up into the air by a dragon man with pitch black wings and scales of the same color. In the center of his 𝗧𝗍 was the Greek symbol for theta. It was clad in white, almost colorless scales. Izuku chuckled a bit and brought her thumb up to her nose and wiped the BLD away from it. She flew, without hesitation, towards the dragon determined to beat his but in order to keep her true and only love safe. He sighed as he looked towards Izuku, so he quickly swapped glances with Toru before headbutting her. A shockwave pushed Izuku backwards and nearly blinded her, so she put her arms up to guard her sensitive eyes from the massive amount of wind that had shot out from the dragon's attack. A loud boom sounded out into the air as the dragon threw Toru at the ground, causing her to be driven into it. "My name is Karasu, not that you will need to remember it," seeing as the dragon appeared in front of Izuku and grabbed her face. "You won't breathe after I'm done with you." He flew into the ground and dragged Izuku's face against the concrete ground of this concrete jungle. Her head carved a path within the ground as it was pushed along by Karasu, It took a lot of her willpower to grab onto his forearm. When she did, she used all of her might to bring him overhead and cause him to crash into the ground headfirst. But 𝗂𝗧 was smart, smarter than Izuku thought. He stopped mid-flight and grabbed onto her forearm, before she could to his, and shattered her connection between her humerus and ulna bones by snapping her elbow joint in half. An ear-splitting cry sounded out from Izuku's battle-torn windpipe. It was an excruciatingly large pain to feel in a singular moment. A foot found its way onto the back of Izuku's head and it pushed itself down with immense speed. Shut up. 𝗂𝗧 brought his foot back up, and Izuku was lying down within the pavement. Her scales had turned back into her normal skin and a small pool of blood was gathering around her head. For everything you boasted about, you went down so fast. 'Tis a shame though. He began to bend downwards. He crouched over her and grabbed a hold of her head and brought it up once more. I was hoping for a much better battle from his child. He was about to slam and crush Izuku's skull onto the pavement, but a bright red light from his left caught his attention. Quickly he let go of her head and appeared next to Toru, kneeing her in the jaw as he did. You can wait your demon turn to die, princess. I have more pressing matters at hand than to take care of you. He looked down at Toru with pity. To see the princess herself in a state like this. To see her dressed in these apes' clothing is just disgraceful, he muttered as he began to slowly walk towards Izuku. Toru propped herself up on her right elbow. Who are you to say that? Who are you to tell me that, 𝗂𝗧? He stopped dead in his tracks. Silence crossed the battlefield for a few moments. Only the distant screams of the innocent and police sirens could be heard. He peered over his shoulder. An icy cold gaze chilled Toru's heart. Was it the gaze of a killer or the glint of inhumanity within his eyes that froze her from the inside out? Well, you came here to live with these apes? A bit of rubble moved in the distance. You're the one that took off without your father's permission. Toru caught a glimpse of an arm rise and touch the ground. You're the one that cost us the whole demon war with you, selfish. He turned around and walked back towards Toru. No. You're the DMN selfish ones. You want a world without 𝗧𝗵𝗃 kicked her in the jaw. The force of his kick sent Toru sprawling onto her back and brought her to the brink of consciousness. The last thing she saw before her sight gave out was Izuku rising from where she laid. But something was wrong. It was as if she was the embodiment of rage with those red, piercing eyes. Perhaps she was the embodiment of wrath with her jagged, sharp, long dragon claws that seemed to be able to cut through the air itself. Or maybe it was her chaotic, demonic wings that sent chills and shivers throughout Toru's body. 𝗂𝗧 turned back around. This is why I hate brats. They only ever give me. You can still stand. I thought I pummeled you into the 𝗧𝗫𝗃. He sidestepped to the right as Izuku swung her left claw. Somehow she just materialized in front of him to do that. She slowly cranked her head toward 𝗂𝗧. The edges of her lips cracked into a crooked, devilish smile that would paralyze anyone with fear. So you couldn't suffer the taste of defeat well enough to stay down? A glint of avarice appeared in 𝗂𝗧's eyes. Perfect. I'll get a full FL dash. He kicked Izuku in the jaw as he jumped backwards. A flip wasn't necessary, but it was added by him. The kick sent Izuku flying into the air. A full-fledged fight between me and the great magician's daughter. So, I don't really give a SHT, just as long as I get to beat you to a pulp. Izuku suspended her flight into the air with a single flap of her wings. All the while 𝗂𝗧 brought his right hand to the theta symbol on his 𝗧. Quickly, a finger dragged across the white scaling, causing the symbol to break. As if on command, a tornado, that was tons stronger than a Category V, appeared out of nowhere and enveloped 𝗂𝗧. This is my ultimate power. One that you will not be able to def dash. A blazing kick from Izuku collided with 𝗂𝗧's right cheek. 𝗂𝗧 grit his teeth to the point where they'd shatter a normal human's jaw. Obviously, he was not a normal human. He gripped Izuku's fiery leg. He didn't so much as flinch as his forearm was engulfed in flame. Suddenly, all the flame dispersed off of his arm. You do know that fire can't be in play if there's too much or too little air pressure, right? He smiled snarkily as he brought her leg over his own head and began to slam her down into the ground. A scream of immense pain erupted from 𝗂𝗧. Izuku fell to the ground. The tornado became weaker as 𝗵𝗃𝗍 spilled from the open gash that had replaced everything above Kurasu's elbow. His arm lay 2 feet away from him. How dare you tear off my arm? He was about to stab Izuku in the face with his remaining claw, but spears of black fire shot out of her body and stabbed straight through his core, the heart. 𝗬𝗲𝗍𝗃 dripped from his mouth before he could say another word. The tornado that surrounded the battle-torn city dispersed. Izuku grunted as she stood up, her body cracked and twisted itself in order to face Kurasu's corpse. Standing above it, the red glint of rage continued to stain her eyes. A blade of black flame shot out of her right hand. She slashed Kurasu's body in half. 𝗵𝗃𝗍𝗃 spattered everywhere, including in her eye, but that didn't stop her from summoning another sword in her left. She slashed with that one as well, separating his left arm from his body. Repeatedly she slashed. Repeatedly she grunted, getting louder and louder with each one. Repeatedly she became more and more twisted with each slash. Was it her animosity against Kurasu that caused this? After about a minute, she ran out of Kurasu to cut, seeing as most of him was either burnt to a crisp or too small to cut into. A ground-shaking, earth-shattering roar escaped from Izuku's throat. It was inhuman, just like her. Toru stirred herself awake. Her head, it was as if someone had yelled directly into her ear and hit her with a sledgehammer. She opened her eyes. The sky was darker than pitch. The wind around her was non-existent. The air was freezing. Something was wrong. She could feel it within her chilled 𝗵𝗃𝗍𝗃. She sat upwards and just now noticed that everything was eerily quiet, enough to raise every single hair on her body. Slowly she looked behind herself. A demon stood over a pile of something that was burning. Though it wasn't normal flame, it was black and gray and devoid of any color. Wait, the demon wasn't an actual demon. There were characteristics of a dragon mixed within its sinister body. Is that the fire, the green scales, the red eyes? To us. Izuku. Toru's breathing deepened. And no, you can't already be like this. She pushed herself up and actually managed to stand up. Before doubling over onto her knees, her body was unwilling to move. Get up, princess. You can't be this weak. Toru quickly ducked, narrowly dodging the claw of her foe. You know, Kurasu, I thought you'd pull all your punches and try to kill me here and now, seeing as I'm now your enemy. Toru said in a sarcastic tone before rushing towards the aforementioned enemy with a claw poised and ready to strike at his stomach. Instead of swiping at his gut, she swiped at the open air. Of course I would pull all my punches, princess. Kurasu grabbed a hold of his right hand and slammed both of them down into Toru's neck. What do you take me for, a beach? Don't make me laugh. Kurasu kicked her in the side. Get up, princess. You can't be this weak. He bent down and grabbed her head only to bring it up. You're right. Kurasu's eyes widened. Looking down, he could only see a jade green claw embedded in his stomach. I'm not weak. 𝗵𝗃𝗍𝗃 spilled from Kurasu's wound, and it was exacerbated by Toru driving her claw deeper and spinning it around like a drill. He yelled out in pain and slashed his newly formed claws through her own, severing only the nails from her body. Kurasu swiped at her and cut through her 𝗧𝗍𝗃. Next he put a gash through her leg, and the final wound he would deliver to her was a stab wound through her right arm. She was overcome with an immense pain, but she powered through it and kicked him in the leg, knocking him down to the ground. She then kneed his face, causing Kurasu to pass out. She breathed heavily in and out. 𝗵𝗃𝗍𝗃 poured down from all over her body. That was a good final battle, Kurasu. She turned around and began to walk away, turning into her full dragon form as she did. But I'm going to stall this pitiful war as much as possible. With an unsteady flap of her wings, she took off into the air. She only had one destination in mind, and that was to head to the neighboring world, Earth. Toru slammed her fist into the ground. You're right, Kurasu. I've got to grit my teeth, brace my body, and stand up. Stand up to face the horrors of the world and protect it. And right now, Izuku her head toward Toru when she heard her name called out. She still seemed to keep a remnant of her humanity. The sound of police sirens was closer than before. You're the horror that I have to face. She pushed herself up, glaring at Izuku the whole time. Standing up, she began to limp toward her demonic lover. I will do whatever it takes. The same earth-shattering roar from earlier escaped Izuku's throat as she stood there, seemingly accepting of her challenge. To save you from yourself, Izuku, she took 2 steps towards Izuku before she went berserk and rushed towards Toru. Even if it means, Izuku appeared in front of Toru, her claw stabbed through Toru's stomach as she was moved into the air. That I have to sacrifice myself. She smiled brightly at Izuku as BLD fell from her stab wound. I love you, Izuku. She grabbed onto her claw and pulled herself closer to Izuku. No matter what, I will always be by your side. Closer and closer, inch by inch she closed into Izuku. Even if I die here, I will watch over you, Izuku, because She reached around Izuku's neck and brought herself closer with a hug. Love you. I love you with every bit of my heart, Izuku. Tears fell out of her eyes. Izuku's claw was now bathed in BLD, but that soon concaved in on itself. Izuku's whole demonic form faded away, leaving behind her normal Dragon Force form. She stood there, a look of terror filled her eyes. Only now had she realized what she did. She asked quietly, tears already streamed down her face. She stood there with Toru's bloody body on her claw. Oh, you can't, not now, Toru. Toru looked into Izuku's eyes. You're back, Izuku-kun. She smiled, revealing a fang that was in the top right corner of her mouth. I'm glad. Her eyes began to slowly close as her life force faded away. She cried into the vast emptiness of the battlefield, but no one was around to help her, and so, Toru began to slowly die within Izuku's arms.